Roger Blumel was born on January 17, 1965, into a household bustling with many members, including his parents and 7 children, 6 boys and a girl. Roger's family was not only large but also very united, raised with a strong sense of values and community life. Even while still in high school, Roger proved to be a hard-working young man with goals for the future. He began driving his father's truck and, after graduating from the local high school, worked in concrete transportation. Later, he discovered that his true calling was in sales, a field in which he eventually found success. According to his friends, he was one of those people capable of selling ice to Eskimos. This skill was also accompanied by a generous, cheerful, and extroverted personality. He always seemed happy, and nothing pleased him more than making everyone around him have a big smile on their faces. Roger had a good life and an excellent relationship with his family. The only thing missing was a partner, and one day he achieved that too. The details are not specified, but a close friend later recounted that at the end of the evening when he met a young woman who captivated him, Roger declared with absolute resolution that she was the woman he was going to marry. The girl in question was named Melissa. She was born in Wichita on January 1, 1960. Her childhood, too, was spent in a loving family comprised of 3 girls and 3 boys, though a younger sister died before reaching her first birthday. Melissa was a sweet, hard-working girl, always ready to help not just her family but everyone around her. She began working as a cashier at a bank where she made a successful career. In the following years, her seriousness, commitment, and sense of collaboration earned her several promotions that led her to become the vice president of the bank. That first meeting marked the beginning of the union of 2 soulmates who married in 1991. Life for the Blumels seemed perfect as Melissa climbed the ranks within the bank, and Roger's charm led him to establish his own business. Roger loved to share time with friends and bring joy to everyone around him. In Melissa, he found the perfect companion. Moreover, both had a strong social consciousness that led them to collaborate and participate in any charitable, sports, or collective activity that took place in their community. However, as we've seen in almost all stories, a perfect life does not exist, and for the Blumels, the only thing missing was a child to bring laughter and joy to their loving home. Unfortunately, this desire remained elusive for the couple, and after years of unsuccessfully trying to conceive, Roger and Melissa began to consider the idea of adopting a child. With this intention, they contacted a local social worker. Their wishes were heard, and doubly so, as a woman named Keisha Scheberg had put up her 2 sons for adoption. Anthony, 7 years old, whom everyone called Tony, and Christopher, 4 years old, known as Chris. Keisha's idea was to place them in an open adoption so she could maintain contact with her sons and the family raising them. However, the Blumels did not consider this the best option, as they wanted to raise the children as their own and completely remove them from what had been a tough start in life. In the end, Roger and Melissa's approach prevailed, and from that moment, Tony and Chris formally became part of the Blumel family, starting to enjoy a life they never knew existed. In fact, it was later known that Tony was amazed he was allowed to have dinner every day. The children quickly adapted and began to enjoy their new life. They attended elementary school and successfully completed that stage as good students. In high school, they were also successful, had no problems with their peers, were fully integrated and made a wide group of friends, and excelled in sports, particularly in wrestling and football. Tony made rapid progress in wrestling, securing second place in a competition in his division. At that time, everything seemed to promise a bright future for the boys and a happy life for the whole family. But the Blumels' world began to turn upside down when Tony reached his senior year of high school, The young man began to change what had until then been exemplary behavior. He turned into someone who was constantly in conflict with his parents, accusing them of always favoring his younger brother Chris. From then on, he engaged in alcohol consumption, disregarded curfews, and even smoked marijuana. Things in the Blumel household became chaotic, and soon it seemed that the last hope for the young man to correct his path was lost. For a long time, Tony had expressed a fervent desire to join the United States Air Force after finishing high school, but this dream dissipated due to his own behavior when, in 2013, he was arrested for an unspecified act of aggression, and shortly after graduating, again for driving under the influence of alcohol. With these records, he could say goodbye to a future in military aviation. These events did not lead Tony to reflect. On the contrary, it plunged him into a downward spiral. Once he graduated from high school, his life had no direction. He did not want to continue studying, nor did he want to work. In fact, he wanted to do nothing more than sleep late and spend the rest of his day immersed in a cloud of cannabis smoke. Melissa lived in terror of the boy's outbursts of rage. And amidst all this situation, which was so difficult to bear, there was something else that the Blumels did not know. Since the spring of 2013, through social media, Keisha had been contacting her biological sons. While it seems Chris either rejected Keisha's friend request or was not very receptive to communicating with his biological mother, Tony not only accepted immediately, but was also completely excited to reconnect with his real mother. Keisha had been devastated after giving her sons to the Blumels. Although she was relieved to know that both had been welcomed into the same good family and would stay together, she could not resign herself to the lack of contact. Reconnecting with her eldest son filled Keisha with excitement, but at the same time she developed a great resentment towards the Blumels, believing that they had turned Chris against her. However, this feeling was undoubtedly overshadowed by the happiness of reconnecting with her firstborn. Additionally, the news of Tony's problems with his adoptive parents fueled Keisha's hope of reuniting with her son, and she wasted no time in offering him to come to see her. Meanwhile, at the adoptive family's home, far from improving, things were getting worse. The conflict reached a point of no return when one day, in the midst of one of his fits of rage, Tony punched a hole in a wall. This was the turning point for the Blumels. They could no longer risk their own safety and that of Chris. After several unsuccessful discussions trying to put an end to the eldest son's behaviors, Roger and Melissa came to the difficult decision to tell Tony that he had to leave the house. The young man initially wandered aimlessly but soon realized he had to do something to sustain himself, so he got some jobs at fast food restaurants and supplemented those meager earnings by selling cannabis. Although he slept like a nomad from night to night at some friends' houses, he ended up associating with a group of youths who were deeply involved in excessive drug use. And amid all these despairing events, a lifeline suddenly appeared for Tony when Keisha told him to come to California to live with her. Tony eagerly accepted the invitation, and the reunion took place in September 2013 at Keisha's house in California. The young man was accompanied by his best friend from high school, Braden, who had dropped out in his junior year to dedicate himself to drug dealing. The two young men were excited because they arrived with the hope of having Keisha's support, who was also versed in the drug trade, to start a large marijuana business in the area, and they even talked about entering the medical cannabis market. The reality was that the two young men had arrived to live in a small apartment which had only one room. It is not hard to imagine that the situation in the place began to be tense, particularly because Sean, Keisha's partner, had 2 jobs and was the only one bringing in money to cover the expenses for 5 people. Keisha only contributed a part of the social assistance she received for her daughter. Keisha, Tony, and Braden spent their days using drugs, and the woman's younger daughter was all the time under that bad influence. Logically, at one point things reached an unacceptable limit, something that happened when Sean found out that Tony and Braden were selling marijuana near her house. She let them know that what they were doing was simply unacceptable and dangerous for her as the property owner. Consequently, she told them to take their drugs elsewhere. Additionally, after this episode, Sean gave an ultimatum to the house occupants. Everyone had to get a job or leave the apartment. Far from making the group reflect, as was her intention, what it achieved was that they formed an alliance to show indignation towards her. They decided to leave the apartment and go to a nearby hotel for 2 weeks. But that was not the solution either, because without having an income, after those weeks they had no means to sustain the hotel payment. The need for money did not make them consider working decently. The first idea they had was to return to Kansas, perhaps because it was familiar territory for Tony in terms of drug dealing. After almost a day on the road, the group decided to stop in Arizona and spend the night at a hotel. It was there that Tony told his travel companions that he had come up with an idea, which was to end the lives of his adoptive parents to claim the inheritance. Once they arrived in Wichita and found accommodation at a hotel they rented for a month, they dedicated themselves to refining the details of that idea. It was a simple solution. They had to end the lives of Roger and Melissa, claim the insurance, sell the assets, and use the resources to start a new, larger-scale drug business. Tony was convinced that the original family, which he had returned to, would become rich by cultivating and selling marijuana. Tony even proposed a perfect day to carry out the crime. It would be Friday, November 15th of that year, 2013, as his brother Chris would not be at home, as he had to attend an event related to his wrestling practice. Tony had been a star in that discipline and still maintained contact with some team members, which is how he learned about his brother's commitment that night. Gradually, the plan was formed, in which Tony would communicate with Roger and Melissa and invite them somewhere with the excuse of talking about what had happened between them and try to fix things. Tony's idea was that, while there was no one at home, Braden would take Keisha to the residence so she could enter and steal some valuables. Tony also knew where his adoptive parents kept a significant amount of money for emergencies. The idea was that the act would appear to be a robbery gone wrong. But from the beginning, the final intention was clear. When Roger and Melissa returned home, Keisha would end their lives. Everyone thought it was an excellent plan, but later, Braden backed out. He did not want to participate in the act, but agreed to help by acquiring the guns they would need. As a substitute, he recommended a friend of his, also a former high school peer named Andrew, who could take on the role as the driver to take Keisha to the Blumels' residence. As promised, Braden procured 2 pistols purchased from other criminals. It should be mentioned that there was never any intention to share the money with Andrew, who was agreed to be paid $1,000 to act essentially as a driver and support for Keisha in the robbery. In the end, she would be the executor. In early November, Keisha posted on her social networks a photo of her with Tony and a caption that read, "A bond that cannot be broken." Finally, the day arrived. It was Friday, November 15th, 2013, and as Tony had predicted, his wonderful adoptive parents did not refuse to meet with him. The meeting went peacefully. While at the Blumels' house, the scene was completely different. As soon as Roger and Melissa left for the meeting, Keisha and Andrew entered the house, forced the garage door, and began to rummage through everything. They took the opportunity to take some small, valuable items and the cash the couple kept in the house for any eventuality. Once the first part of the plan was carried out, Keisha and Andrew hid beside the secluded residence to wait for their victims to arrive. They soon received a call from Tony, informing them that the meeting had ended, that his adoptive parents had dropped him off at the hotel, and they were on their way home. The wait was not too long. As soon as the Blumels' vehicle stopped in front of the parking gate, the two attackers came out of their hiding place. Keisha immediately positioned herself on Melissa's side, while Andrew aimed at Roger to keep him still. Melissa, still surprised, recognized the mother of the children they had adopted more than 10 years ago to provide love, stability, and a better future. She only managed to say, "Oh my God, Keisha," when a precise shot to the head made her collapse in the seat. Roger, completely disconcerted, tried to assist his wife. Meanwhile, Keisha reached the man's window and pulled the trigger towards Roger's head, but the gun jammed. The woman made several attempts to shoot while he was frozen, with the slumped body of his wife next to him. Finally, the gun fired, and Roger also collapsed next to the one who had been the best partner for his life project. Once the fatal plan was carried out, Keisha and Andrew boarded the vehicle they had arrived in and quickly left. The Blumel spouses remained there until around 9:15 p.m., when Chris returned from his meeting and found the terrible scene. He immediately called 911, reporting that he had just arrived home and found his parents practically unconscious inside their van. The young man stated that Roger was coughing and that Melissa was bobbing her head up and down. Both had gunshot marks on their heads. The dispatcher instructed him to try resuscitation maneuvers while emergency services arrived a few minutes later and took over the situation. Miraculously, the Blumels were still alive, but their lives were hanging by a thread, so they were immediately transported to a hospital. While all this was happening, upon returning to the hotel where they were staying, Keisha seemed to have a panic attack and stated that all she needed was to consume some illicit substance, and she did so accompanied by the other boys. Also, at that moment, Keisha handed over the used gun and a wallet of Melissa's that she had stolen from the house to be disposed of in a nearby stream. Andrew threw the items into the pond of a nearby park. The following day, Tony began using the money stolen from his adoptive parents' home to start trafficking marijuana, earning his first $100. Unfortunately, that same day, Melissa lost her battle and passed away at the age of 53. Tony also went to the hospital to see his father, but what he did not know is that sometime before, he had been removed from both the Blumels' will and their insurance policies. Consequently, the two heinous crimes had been committed in vain. In the following days, it was also discovered that Andrew had not been paid and was even unaware that Keisha had taken cash from the Blumel family's home. Eventually, fate caught up with them. In the initial inspections of the Blumel residence, the police noticed that the garage door had been forced open, and inside the home everything was in disarray. There were items scattered everywhere. It was confirmed that money, jewelry, and other items had been stolen. The authorities wondered if the attack on the spouses had been a result of them arriving while the thieves were still in the house. However, the fatal assault had occurred before the couple entered the home, so this initial hypothesis was dismissed. In the van where Roger and Melissa were attacked, there were no significant fingerprints, although investigators did find a bullet casing. Then, the authorities turned their attention towards the victims' workplaces, thinking perhaps an upset client had sought revenge. But this theory was also discarded, so it was time to talk to people close to the couple. The first on the detectives' list was Tony, as he had been the last person seen alive with the victims. But the young man insisted he knew nothing and had not participated in the act. According to him, after finishing dinner, he had gone straight back to the hotel where he was staying with his mother. This information was confirmed by the staff at the tolls. The second on the list was Chris, who had found the bodies, but he was quickly dismissed after verifying his statement that at the time of the incident, he was at a dinner with members of the wrestling team. However, the investigators found something strange in the young man's behavior. He didn't seem overly disturbed and instead appeared to be lost in thought. When the police pursued this direction and asked him what he thought had happened to his parents, Chris immediately replied that there was only one person who came to mind. He added that the only one who might hold any grudge against their parents and perhaps be capable of such an act was his older brother, Tony. With this significant lead, the authorities got a lucky break in their search for the culprits. A man contacted the police to say that a young man who was a friend of Tony had approached him intending to buy a gun. The detectives focused on this individual, and upon checking his background found he had a long history related to drugs. Moreover, they discovered he had traveled to California along with Tony. It was Braden. Sooner rather than later, Braden received a message from his family informing him that the sheriff's office investigators were looking to interrogate him about what had happened to the Blumels. The morning after receiving this information, Braden went to the police station. A press report states that on his way to the police station, he stopped by a pond to throw away something, apparently the guns used in the crime, which had not been disposed of as planned. According to this account, he was already under surveillance, and when the police searched the water, they found in the bag he threw a pistol that had not been fired in the attack. Braden's interrogation lasted for 3 days. At first, the young man maintained he had nothing to do with the incident, but he couldn't withstand the pressure from the authorities and ended up confessing everything he knew, stating that the idea for the attack had been Tony's. Tony Blumel, 18 years old, and his biological mother, Keisha, 35, were arrested on November 19th at the hotel where they were staying. Additionally, Andrew, then 18 years old, was arrested. And finally, Braden, also 18, was put behind bars on November 20th of that same year, 2013. At that time, Keisha did not admit her participation in the robbery and other crimes, although the 3 young men confessed what had happened. On November 25th, 2013, the accused made their first appearance before the court via video conference. On that occasion, they were all charged with the same offenses: first-degree murder, attempted first-degree murder, 2 counts of aggravated robbery, burglary, and theft. The 3 young men were set a bail of $500,000, and for Keisha, the bail was set at $1 million. On December 21st, Roger's heart stopped beating, and at 48 years old, he joined his beloved Melissa. And after Roger's death, the situation for the woman and the 3 young men worsened, as they could be charged with capital murder, which could imply a death penalty sentence. Indeed, on January 3, 2014, the 4 detainees were formally charged with a count of capital murder for being the alleged perpetrators of the death of more than 1 person in the same incident. Additionally, Keisha was charged with 2 counts of aggravated robbery, 1 count of burglary, and 1 count of theft. The preliminary hearing took place on July 17th of that same year. By that time, Braden had negotiated with the authorities, and in exchange for a benefit in his sentence, he ended up becoming the prosecution's star witness. After a year of negotiations, not only did Braden reach an agreement, but 2 other individuals involved in the crime also negotiated with the prosecution. According to the agreements reached, the accused would not dispute the charges against them and would waive their right to appeal their sentences. In exchange, the prosecution agreed not to seek the death penalty and to drop some charges. Starting in mid-2015, in separate hearings, each confirmed their decision to plead guilty. The judge sentenced Keisha to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for the capital murder charge, and additionally to 122 months in prison for 2 counts of aggravated robbery. The sentences would be served consecutively. In her opportunity to speak, she stated she deeply regretted what had happened and lamented everything the Blumel family had to go through. The rest of her statement was controversial, as she claimed she had nothing to do with the incident, having no anger towards the Blumels. On the contrary, she had the utmost respect for them, as they had given Tony and Chris a wonderful life, and she would always be grateful for that. According to official records to this day, Keisha remains detained in a high-security level correctional facility. The second to face his fate was her son, Anthony Blumel, known to everyone as Tony, who received the same sentence as his mother. During the sentencing hearing, Tony, who declined to speak when given the opportunity, heard the victim impact statement made by his aunt, Christina Blumel, who thanked the authorities for administering justice and referred to all the love that Roger and Melissa had given the boy. In complete silence, Tony listened to Christina's heartfelt words, and at one moment, tears almost sprang from the young criminal's eyes. In the end, the woman told Tony that he had chosen his path without anyone forcing him to make those decisions. She added that perhaps one day he might understand his choices, or perhaps he never would. Tony has been since then in a correctional facility. His record up to this moment listed a significant number of prison infractions related to smuggling, fights, unauthorized phone use, explicit sex, theft, and disobedience, among others. A week after these sentences, it was Andrew's turn, the only one who did not agree to acknowledge his responsibility and was found guilty of first and second-degree murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, plus 155 months. Finally, Braden, the last of the participants in the incident and who from the beginning had reached an agreement with the prosecution, was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to 24.5 years in prison. According to his official record, his first opportunity for release will be on May 28, 2035. However, his prison record shows that far from reforming, Braden had received 71 disciplinary reports for disobedience, threats to others, stimulant use, intoxication, possession of tobacco contraband, theft, and dangerous smuggling, among other causes. In the end, the district attorney expressed satisfaction with the outcome of this case. It's worth noting that even though she had waived that right, Keisha attempted to appeal her sentences unsuccessfully. At the end of this story, only one thing remains undisputed. The lives of 2 wonderful people, Roger and Melissa Blumel, were cut short with a terrible and unnecessary ending. The bitterness, or perhaps the guilt of a woman who led a life of excess for which she gave up her children for adoption, was the genesis of the tragedy. She couldn't bear that one of her descendants wanted nothing more to do with her, which apparently led her to direct her anger at the people who gave all their love and well-being to her children. For his part, Tony repaid all the love and care received from that couple with resentment, envy, and violence, resorting to an unjustifiable path of substance abuse, and finally, a double crime. Keisha's younger daughter ended up being sent to a foster home. As for Chris Blumel, he managed to overcome what happened and has led a good life with the support of the family. Stephanie Scott was a well-known and highly respected high school teacher from New South Wales, Australia. On Easter Sunday in 2015, she had gone to school to prepare for her upcoming classes. Later that afternoon, as she was leaving, she was ambushed from behind and forced into a storage closet where a grisly, callous and disturbing crime unfolded. But the most shocking part was yet to come. As police soon discovered, the crime hit much closer to home than anyone could have anticipated. Evidence revealed that Stephanie knew her attacker. This heartbreaking, stomach-churning story is one of the most cold and heartless crimes I've ever covered here on Unreal True Crime. Stephanie Scott was born on October 14, 1988, in Sydney, Australia. She was the second youngest of 5 children born to Marilyn and Robert Scott, affectionately known as Bob. The family made their home in Canawindra, a small town with around 2,000 residents located in the central western region of New South Wales. Growing up in the serene and peaceful surroundings of their family farm, Stephanie and her siblings formed a close-knit, loving family that cherished the simple joys of life. Stephanie was an extraordinary child raised in a healthy, joyful environment brimming with love. She was not only beautiful and intelligent, but also possessed a kind, gentle, and compassionate personality. Known for her sense of humor, Stephanie loved playing pranks. Her loved ones described her as noble, affectionate, and down-to-earth, always willing to lend a helping hand. Putting others before herself was a fundamental aspect of her character. With her infectious joy and radiant smile, Stephanie could brighten anyone's day. Even from a young age, she displayed wisdom beyond her years, listening without judgment and offering the best advice. Her empathy and ability to inspire were remarkable, and she despised cruelty, especially towards children and animals. As a teenager with a keen sense of fashion, she became a role model for her peers. After finishing primary school, Stephanie attended the high school where her father worked. It was there that she met Aaron Leeson Woolley, a charming classmate who shared her passion for football. They quickly became friends and both took part-time jobs at a local supermarket. Spending so much time together, Aaron became like a member of the Scott family. Upon graduating from high school, Stephanie chose to follow in her father's footsteps and pursue a career in education. Aaron supported her decision, even though it meant she would have to move to Wagga Wagga for university. The distance made them realize their true feelings for each other. In May 2010, during Aaron's 21st birthday party, their friendship blossomed into a romantic relationship. Despite the physical distance, they maintained their bond through frequent visits, shared holidays, and constant communication via phone and text. Their relationship grew stronger with each passing day, and everyone believed they were meant to be together. After Stephanie graduated and returned home, she received a job offer in another town. The couple moved to Leeton, a small agricultural town in New South Wales. Before they left, Marilyn, proud of her daughter's achievements, gifted Stephanie a graduation ring. Once settled in their new home, Stephanie began her career teaching English and drama at Leeton High School. She was incredibly happy because teaching was undoubtedly her true passion. Her dedication to each student was evident. She didn't just impart knowledge, but also took a genuine interest in their feelings and thoughts. Stephanie became a mentor to many of them, her remarkable personality making her very popular among the students. She also earned the admiration and respect of her colleagues. Her ever-present smile reminded everyone that fulfilling one's vocation was a key to happiness. A joyous event took place on April 11, 2014. Stephanie and Aaron got engaged. They set their wedding date for exactly a year later. Stephanie poured her heart into planning their wedding, meticulously attending to every detail to ensure their guests would enjoy the day as much as she would. Aaron supported her every step of the way, even taking dance classes with her so their first dance as a married couple would be perfect. They also made reservations for their honeymoon in Fiji, convinced it was the most romantic destination for any couple in love. They never imagined their plans would be tragically cut short. On March 2, 2015, a new employee joined the company contracted to clean the school where Stephanie worked. His name was Vincent Stanford, a 24-year-old born on December 21, 1990, in Tasmania. Vincent had an identical twin named Marcus. When the twins were 3, the family moved to the Netherlands. His father eventually returned to Australia and lost contact with them, leaving his mother to raise the children alone. Vincent's childhood was typical, but as he grew, he became increasingly withdrawn and had severe difficulties socializing. His behavior problems at school escalated, earning him the nickname Psycho due to his violent outbursts. According to later reports, Vincent began having homicidal thoughts around the age of 7 or 8. At 12, he attacked his teacher, attempting to strangle her. As a result, he was expelled and sent to a behavior school for socially maladjusted children. Later, he was admitted to a psychiatric center for teenagers, where he was diagnosed with autism and oppositional defiant disorder. This diagnosis indicated his challenges in forming friendships and relationships. After his release, Vincent tried to enroll in university and join the military, but both attempts were unsuccessful. In 2013, he returned to Australia with his mother and siblings. Vincent appeared quiet and reserved, with his distinct Dutch accent, and had no friends or social contacts. He found the company of others stressful and cycled through various jobs before being hired by the cleaning company servicing Stephanie's school. Vincent's troubling behavior soon resurfaced. Unbeknownst to anyone, he began watching female students during lunch and secretly in the bathrooms. He fixated on a 12-year-old girl, stalking her both inside and outside school, taking daily photographs and documenting her movements in a notebook. He seemed to be planning to abduct her. It was later discovered that he also stalked 2 women working in nearby shops. By Easter week 2015, less than a week before Stephanie and Aaron's wedding, the couple was invited to a party in their hometown. Stephanie couldn't travel because she needed to prepare lessons for her substitute teacher and finalize a few details for the reception. Aaron didn't want to go without her but wanted to see his parents and best friend before the wedding. On Friday, April 3rd at 12:30 p.m., Aaron left for his hometown, unaware that it would be the last time he would see the woman he was about to marry. The young couple kept in touch through calls and text messages. Aaron attended the Saturday night party and then stayed at his parents' house. He and his fiancée spoke on the phone, saying their goodnights around 10:30 p.m. On the morning of Sunday, April 5th, 2015, Stephanie left her home to go to the school. While on her way, she sent a text to Aaron detailing her plans for the day. Around 11 a.m., she parked her red Mazda 3 next to the school. Then, she walked a few blocks to pick up the school keys from a colleague who lived nearby. Her coworker accompanied her back to the school and watched as she entered and locked the front door behind her. She went up to the second floor to the English teacher's lounge, where she sat down to work on her computer. Unexpectedly, Vincent was also in the building. Hearing noises, he passed by the lounge and saw Stephanie for the first time. Despite working there for over a month, he had never met her and had no idea she would be there. As he later confessed, upon seeing her, he felt an overwhelming urge to take her life. Vincent went home to retrieve what he called his assault kit, which consisted of a bottle of lubricant erectile dysfunction pills, several condoms, and some flexible handcuffs. It took him about 10 minutes to go and return. Upon arriving back at the school, he stayed downstairs, waiting for Stephanie to come out. Around 1 p.m., Stephanie sent an email to the bus driver who would transport the wedding guests from the ceremony to the reception hall, confirming that she had made the final payment to secure the service. An hour later, she finished her work, turned off her laptop, and packed up to leave. She retraced her steps back to the main entrance, walking down the corridor towards the large metal gate. Almost there, she encountered Vincent. She smiled and wished him a happy Easter. As she was taking her keys out of her bag, Vincent grabbed her from behind and covered her mouth with his hand. Terrified, the 26-year-old tried to scream for help and kicked and scratched, trying to escape. But he overpowered her and dragged her down the hallway into a dark photo development room. Once inside, Stephanie tried to flee, but Vincent violently pushed her to the floor. He used his left arm to pin her down by her throat and began savagely punching her face with his right fist for almost a minute, repeatedly, until she was unconscious. He then put on a condom and sexually assaulted her. Afterward, he took out a knife and inflicted several severe wounds to her neck. Once he was sure Stephanie was no longer breathing, he left the knife on the floor and went home to eat lunch. At home, he made himself a cheese sandwich and drank some coffee. Later, he returned to the school to clean the scene. Vincent washed the knife in the maintenance room and collected the items that had fallen from Stephanie in the hallway, including her car keys. He then moved her Mazda to the other side of the school. Returning to Stephanie, he placed yellow adhesive tape around her neck to contain the bleeding. Vincent placed a plastic sheet in the trunk of the car and put Stephanie's body on top. He closed the vehicle and re-entered the building, where he used a high-pressure cleaner to wash the crime scene. By then, it was past 3 p.m. Vincent left the school and drove Stephanie's car to his home, parking it behind a large shed in his backyard. He then walked back to the school to retrieve his white Toyota Hilux. Upon arrival, Vincent removed the floorboards from the darkroom, which were soaked with the young woman's bodily fluids. He loaded the wooden planks into his vehicle and returned home. Meanwhile, Aaron tried calling his fiancée, but she didn't answer. He found it odd, but thought she might be deeply focused on her work or that her phone was on silent or out of battery. Before leaving his parents' house, he sent a text to confirm if they would go out for dinner when he got back, but received no reply. By around 7:30 p.m., Aaron arrived at the home they shared, surprised to find neither Stephanie nor her car there. His concern grew when she still hadn't responded to his messages. He decided to drive around town to look for her, checking at the high school, friends' houses, and the main street, but saw no sign of her car. Although increasingly worried, he thought pre-wedding nerves might have driven her to stay elsewhere for the night, so he returned home and tried to sleep. In the early hours of Monday, April 6th, Aaron woke up frequently at every noise, hoping Stephanie had returned. Meanwhile, Vincent had driven Stephanie's car, with her body in the trunk, to Cocopara National Park. Once there, he placed her on the ground, removed her clothes, and covered her with branches. He then doused her with gasoline and set her on fire. Vincent gathered the removed clothes, the car's sun visor, and the plastic sheet used to cover the trunk, and placed them in a bag. Before leaving, he picked up the gasoline canister. Vincent returned home, left the items in the shed, changed his clothes, and abandoned Stephanie's car near an irrigation canal. After 7:30 a.m., he drove around town, disposing of Stephanie's belongings in various trash bins along the main street and near a sports complex. However, he kept her driver's license and engagement and graduation rings. Meanwhile, Aaron had risen early to send another message to his girlfriend but received no response. He started calling friends and the Scott family, but no one had heard from Stephanie. By then, Aaron was convinced something was wrong and went to the police station to report his fiancée missing. The news caused a stir in the peaceful community, which quickly mobilized to search for her. The police immediately launched an operation and triangulated Stephanie's cell phone, but it was either turned off or not functioning. Checking her bank accounts revealed the last transaction occurred on Easter Saturday, and there were no recent social media posts or interactions. When detectives interviewed Stephanie's family, they were seriously concerned and made it clear she wouldn't disappear voluntarily, convinced something terrible had happened. At 8 a.m. on April 7, 2015, the police requested information via social media and the press. The case quickly garnered extensive coverage. A distraught Aaron appeared on television, pleading for his fiancée to call him. Detectives visited the high school searching for clues and inspected Stephanie's classroom. They checked the alarm system to confirm the time she had deactivated and reactivated it, establishing the duration she had been on the premises. Forensic services and a K-9 unit also arrived to search for evidence not immediately visible. By late Tuesday afternoon, a large group of Stephanie's family and friends gathered, desperate to enter the school, fearing she might be held captive on the grounds. The police convinced them not to force entry. It was then that a neighbor mentioned seeing Vincent, the school cleaner, working on Easter Sunday with his vehicle parked at the institution. Officers went to his house and, when questioned, Vincent admitted being at the school briefly to take out the trash. He denied knowing or seeing Stephanie there and wished them luck in their search, a comment that aroused suspicion in the detectives. The next day, April 8th, they decided to question him again. Since Vincent wasn't home, the police asked his mother to tell her son to contact them. Vincent had gone to the post office to mail a package containing Stephanie's rings and license to his brother. He then texted his brother to ask him to keep the package safe. By around 11 a.m., Vincent arrived at the police station and gave a statement to the detectives. He claimed he had been cleaning the school all weekend and hadn't seen anyone else there, except for some skateboarders who were later identified and interviewed. He added that he went to a supermarket afterward to buy food. This detail caught the officers' attention since they knew the named store was closed on Sundays. They contacted the store manager, who confirmed they were closed for Easter. An hour later, a special task force was activated to investigate the suspicious disappearance of the teacher. The team was composed of specialized agents and was implemented when cases became complex in Australia. The first thing the agents did was interview Vincent's employer, who told them that all his workers had time off for Easter, so Vincent shouldn't have been at the school those days. Detectives then called Vincent to confirm the supermarket story. He repeated his false account, making him the prime suspect. At 6 p.m., the detectives arrived at Vincent's residence. He wasn't there, but his mother and brother were. His mother consented to a search of the house. In Vincent's room, they found a set of keys on a red and white cord matching the description of the keys given to Stephanie by her colleague to access the school. They also found an empty condom wrapper and some unopened ones on the floor. Outside, they noticed fresh tire tracks leading from the front of the house to the backyard that didn't match Vincent's truck. At the end of the tracks, they found a used condom and yellow tape, prompting the agents to declare the area a crime scene. Vincent's family was escorted to the police station. Meanwhile, Vincent had returned to the location where he had abandoned Stephanie's body, taking photos. As he later revealed in an interview, he returned to see if she was still there or if wild animals had taken her. Unbeknownst to him, a group of Boy Scouts camping in the park had taken a photo at 5:34 p.m. that day, which would later be crucial. When Vincent returned home, he told the detectives he had been taking photos. A digital camera was on the passenger seat of his truck, and in the back were wooden planks with reddish stains. The vehicle was confiscated, and detectives asked Vincent to accompany them to the police station. Upon turning on the camera, the investigators saw the first image, burnt human remains in a bush, resembling a woman's body. At the station, Vincent continued denying any contact with Stephanie or her car. Although not yet under arrest, the conversation was recorded with his consent. They questioned Vincent about the various scratches on his face and right forearm. He explained that a week prior, he had hit his head and collided with tree branches. As for the photos found on his camera, Vincent claimed they were from a horror movie he downloaded from the internet because he found them amusing. After the interview, Vincent was placed under arrest and given the opportunity to speak with a lawyer, which he declined. However, he agreed to undergo several forensic tests, including a medical examination of his injuries with photographs and measurements, as well as nail scrapings and a mouth swab for DNA analysis. Once the results were in, the investigators had no doubt. Vincent was charged with the crime against Stephanie Scott, denied bail, and taken to jail. When Vincent's brother learned of his brother's arrest, he opened the package and found Stephanie's driver's license and photographed it before burning it. He kept the rings, awaiting further instructions from Vincent. The detectives analyzed Vincent's truck. The GPS system had recorded a trip to Cocopara National Park, and material found on the wheel arches indicated the vehicle had traveled on a gravel or dirt road. Additionally, a closed condom and a cell phone were discovered under the passenger seat. The stains on the wooden planks recovered from the truck were confirmed to be biological fluids matching Stephanie's genetic profile. On the morning of April 9, 2015, the police notified the Scott family of Vincent's arrest and the charges against him, including the photos found on his camera. They withheld the fact that the remains were burnt. However, the information about the burned body leaked to the national media, devastating Stephanie's loved ones. That same day, at 9:30 a.m., a car matching the description of Stephanie's car was found. The area was declared a crime scene, and the vehicle was taken for forensic analysis. Specialists found traces of fluids in the trunk and on the rear bumper, which matched Stephanie's DNA. There were also traces of Vincent's genetic code. A subsequent thorough forensic examination of the Stanford residence uncovered the plastic used to cover the Mazda's trunk and an empty gasoline can behind the shed. Inside, they found Stephanie's keys, a red bra identified by her family, and the sharp weapon used to kill her. In a closet, they discovered a bottle of lubricant, several condoms, and flexible handcuffs, all stained with the victim's blood. They seized a computer from Vincent's bedroom, which was later examined by the Electronic Evidence Unit. The hard drive contained numerous images of crimes, sexual assaults, and other disturbing content involving animals, as well as bomb-making materials and surveillance photos and videos of women and students. They also found that Vincent had spent the early hours of April 5th searching the internet for information about knives and had previously researched about abducting women and teachers. Additionally, he had looked into leg cuffs and made an online purchase of flexible handcuffs and a dagger-style knife. At 8 a.m. on April 10, 2015, a witness came forward at the police station, reporting that around 4 p.m. on Monday, they saw a vehicle resembling Vincent's parked by the main irrigation canal. The man said he saw someone throw a laptop into the water before running back to the truck and leaving. The next day, police divers retrieved the device. Forensic technology specialists dried it quickly, downloaded its contents, and confirmed it belonged to Stephanie. Despite police efforts, Stephanie's body remained missing. News outlets published photos of Vincent's vehicle, urging anyone with information to contact the police. The scouts who had been in Cocopera National Park on April 8th responded to this call. A photograph taken by one of the boys showed Vincent driving his white truck, leaving the area where he had allegedly abandoned Stephanie's body. Thanks to this lead, near 5 p.m. on April 10th, the day before Stephanie's scheduled wedding, police found charred human remains in a narrow scrubland strip in the park, near a road. Upon analysis, the body was identified as that of the missing teacher. On what should have been Stephanie and Aaron's wedding day, April 11, 2015, Vincent requested to speak with the lead investigator. Vincent finally confessed to the crime, stating that he had gone a bit crazy and felt an overwhelming urge to take Stephanie's life. He admitted to hitting her about 40 times but offered no reason or emotion behind his actions, suggesting his mental problems had resurfaced. When asked why he had a knife with him, Vincent explained that he kept it in the cleaning room as a tool he had previously used to open something. On April 13, 2015, an autopsy revealed that Stephanie died from blunt force trauma to the head. She had hematomas on the right side of her face, a small laceration on her eyebrow, a fractured nose, and an eye injury consistent with severe impact. Additionally, there were 2 knife wounds on the right side of her neck, with the right internal jugular vein being severed, though no associated hemorrhage was found along the cut's path. On April 21st, Vincent was interviewed again to clarify the details of his confession and to locate Stephanie's rings. Vincent revealed that his brother Marcus had helped with the rings. The next day, after 1 p.m., Stephanie's funeral was held, attended by over 1,500 people, including family, friends, students, and community members. They gathered at the location where she was supposed to marry Aaron. Many wore black with a touch of yellow. Townspeople tied yellow ribbons to trees along the route to the funeral. Stephanie's family and friends shared beautiful tributes about her reflective nature and care for others. On May 9, 2015, Vincent called his twin brother Marcus, asking him to sell the rings. Marcus, in an act he later described as misguided loyalty, pawned them for $705 in Adelaide. In a subsequent phone call, Vincent instructed Marcus to buy a plane ticket to visit him in jail and give the rest of the money to their mother. Marcus followed these instructions and visited Vincent on May 20th. 2 days later, Marcus was interviewed by the police. He denied receiving any packages from his brother and had deleted their text messages. Due to the case's uproar, Marcus and his father decided to move to a different city, where Marcus started working on a flower farm. However, on June 9th, authorities visited Marcus's new home. During the search, they seized a camera, a pawn shop receipt, and his mobile phone. Marcus was arrested and taken to New South Wales, charged as an accessory to murder and placed in the Unitary Correctional Facility. On August 5th, during questioning, Marcus stated he never understood why Vincent sent him Stephanie's belongings, expressing confusion and anger. 7 months later, on March 31, 2016, Marcus pleaded guilty. On July 19, 2016, it was Vincent's turn to appear before the same court, where he pled guilty to aggravated sexual assault and murder. Psychological evaluations revealed a pattern of social and interpersonal deficits, including an inability to experience emotions, extreme detachment, and indifference to others. It was clear that he harbored violent thoughts, which, when stressed, could reach an intolerable level. He scored high on scales of perversion and violence, though his psychopathy tendencies were low. According to the presented tests, Vincent told the forensic psychologist that being around people was stressful and unpleasant for him. He claimed the crime was not premeditated and that, while he did not enjoy committing it, doing so helped reduce his overall tension and overwhelming need to kill the young woman. A month later, on August 24, 2016, Marcus was sentenced to 15 months without parole for being an accessory to his brother after the crime. The judge described his actions as absolutely atrocious, shameful, and unforgivable, noting that despite being driven by misguided loyalty to his brother, Marcus had abandoned morality and human decency in favor of a criminal's interests. Marcus's sentence was retroactive to his arrest, so he was released on September 9th of the same year. Despite nearly 60,000 people signing an online petition to appeal his sentence as insufficient, Marcus expressed regret for helping his brother and publicly apologized, assuring he no longer wanted anything to do with Vincent. He returned to his father's home, but they had to move due to local hostility. They relocated to a rural town in New South Wales, keeping a low profile. A month later, on October 10, 2016, court sessions resumed for Vincent's sentencing. Stephanie's mother took the stand to speak about the emotional impact of the crime. One of her most poignant statements was lamenting that her daughter spent her wedding day in a morgue, without vows or a wedding dance. The video of Vincent's police confession from April 2015 was then shown. As everyone listened in shock, Vincent sat with his head down. Finally, on October 12, 2016, the judge announced the sentence. In his verdict, the judge described Vincent's behavior as deeply disturbing, noting his fluctuations between despair and unmet expectations, leading to deep-seated hatred. He declared the case fell within the worst category and left no doubt about Vincent's guilt. Vincent Stanford was sentenced to 15 years without parole for aggravated sexual assault and life imprisonment for the murder of Stephanie Scott. Upon the verdict's announcement, the public showed support. Just 2 weeks after Vincent's sentencing, another tragedy struck the Scott family. On October 31, 2016, while chopping trees, Bob lost his life when a trunk fell on him at the family farm. In 2018, the Scott family initiated legal action against the New South Wales Department of Education and the cleaning company that employed Vincent, citing ongoing nervous shock, a legal term for permanent psychiatric distress following a relative's death. In June 2020, both parties reached an out-of-court settlement with details kept confidential, and the Scotts received compensation. Aaron managed to rebuild his life. 5 years after the tragedy, on July 7, 2020, he announced his engagement on social media. He got married in December of that year and 2 years later welcomed a daughter named Sienna. Many consider Stephanie Scott's murder one of the most heinous crimes in recent Australian history. Such a cruel and inhuman act shook the entire country. On November 27, 2021, the police in Hamilton, Scotland received a report about the disappearance of a 16-year-old girl named Amber Gibson. Amber was living at the Hill House Children's Unit and had left the day before, on November 26th, to meet her 19-year-old brother, Connor Gibson. However, Amber never returned, and her disappearance triggered the investigation into one of the most shocking cases in Scotland's history. Born on November 1, 2005 in Scotland, Amber Gibson was the second child of Anne Marie Adams and Peter Gibson. She joined the family 2 years after the birth of their first child, Connor Gibson. Amber, a beautiful red-haired baby, contrasted sharply with her brother, who had fair skin and dark hair. Their striking looks and cheerful personalities made them stand out. However, their home was marred by domestic violence. From a tender age, Amber and Connor witnessed their father's abusive behavior towards their mother. Peter's violence knew no bounds, causing physical, emotional, and mental harm to Anne-Marie. He also had a criminal history, which included assaults on 2 minors and the abuse of an unknown woman. Due to these dire circumstances, both Amber and Connor were removed from their parental home and placed in the care of social services. After a thorough evaluation, they were relocated to live with the Niven family. Craig and Carol Niven, along with their 2 daughters, provided a nurturing and harmonious environment. This new home offered Amber and Connor a chance for a loving and dignified life, far removed from their troubled beginnings. At the ages of 3 and 5, respectively, Amber and Connor found solace and security with the Nivens. Connor even reassured Amber, saying they were finally safe. Meanwhile, their biological father, Peter, was convicted and sentenced to prison for his crimes. Craig and Carol Niven committed themselves to being exemplary parents. Their dedication led to the permanent custody of both children. Despite this positive change, Connor's past trauma began to manifest as he entered adolescence. Hoping it was just a phase, Craig and Carol took steps to address his needs, including enrolling him in a secondary school for children with social, emotional, and behavioral difficulties. Amber, in contrast, was flourishing. She displayed remarkable human qualities despite her early hardships. Generous, caring, and kind-hearted, Amber had an incredible perspective on life. She loved art and singing and attended Morehouse Academy, Bathgate. Her teachers and classmates admired her brilliance and vivacity, noting her big dreams and aspirations for the future. Amber's adoptive parents couldn't have been more pleased, and her foster sisters, Zero, were equally happy to have her around. However, Connor's behavior became increasingly concerning. Former classmates described him as unpleasant and noted that he spoke about harming others. There were even rumors that he had threatened a baby during that period. At home, things were no better. Craig eventually decided that leaving Connor alone with his younger sister was not advisable. He mentioned that they were not a good combination together, but never elaborated further. Despite the conflicts, Amber remained loyal to her brother, always trying to keep the peace. Then, an unexplained event occurred. Although Amber seemed like an ideal foster child, at 14, the care arrangement was terminated, and she moved to the Hill House Children's Unit in Hamilton. Paradoxically, her problematic brother stayed with the Nivens for another 2 years until he turned 18. Shortly after, Connor moved to the Blue Triangle homeless shelter. Despite the distance, Amber ensured that Connor remained a constant presence in her life. When Amber was 16, she crossed paths with Jamie Stars, a 20-year-old leading a chaotic lifestyle, living just 3 miles from her new residence. Jamie had been removed from his parents' care at 3 years old and had led a troubled life, including substance abuse and criminal behavior. In May 2021, Jamie assaulted a young woman in the area. Taking advantage of her intoxicated state, he proceeded without her consent. When the victim reported the assault to the authorities, Jamie sent threatening messages to her friend via social media, attempting to coerce her into withdrawing the complaint. Despite the friend's testimony, his identity was legally protected. Jamie was charged with the assault and attempting to pervert the course of justice, resulting in his arrest. However, he was soon released on bail. In June 2021, Amber traveled to Bothwell, the place where Jamie lived. Although she didn't know Jamie, they ended up in the same lodging unit. That night, while Amber was asleep, Jamie attacked and assaulted her. Amber awoke to find herself undressed, with Jamie, also naked, beside her. She had no recollection of embracing or kissing him, leading to speculation that he might have drugged her, though no tests were conducted to confirm this. Gathering her courage, Amber reported the assault to the police. She identified Jamie from a photo lineup. The police started investigating the case. In July, Jamie faced justice again. Witnesses included the Amber and the first victim. Their testimonies revealed Jamie's method of preying on vulnerable girls. Jamie appeared in court via video link from police custody. His defense argued that his actions might be linked to his traumatic childhood. However, acknowledging his difficult past, the High Court judged him for his poor choices. Jamie was found guilty of both assaults, his name added indefinitely to the sex offender registry. He was also convicted of attempting to pervert the course of justice and breaching bail conditions. The sentencing hearing at the High Court in Edinburgh soon followed. One of the first to speak was the defense attorney, who emphasized that the authorities should consider the sentencing guidelines for individuals under 25 years old. In Scotland, the law suggests that younger people should receive lighter sentences due to their emotional immaturity and higher potential for rehabilitation. To support his argument, the defense lawyer pointed out a report indicating that Jamie exhibited cognitive and emotional immaturity. After hearing the defense's case, the judge acknowledged the relevance of Jamie's age and difficult background. However, he reminded Jamie and everyone in attendance that the crimes were still severe, even describing them as atrocious due to their impact on innocent victims. Consequently, the judge sentenced Jamie to 10.5 years in prison. Moreover, given the high risk of reoffending, Jamie was ordered to be under supervision for 2 years following his release. After the hearing, the police stated that the evidence and testimony provided by Amber were crucial in securing the conviction. Throughout this challenging process, Connor reached out to the Hill House Children's Unit to talk to his sister. Despite knowing his volatile temperament, Amber clung to the hope of reconnecting with her only available family member. The residence manager tried to discourage her from contacting Connor, but her efforts were in vain. Amber's close friend recalled that, despite their turbulent relationship, Amber had a special bond with Connor and was eager to see him. However, just as suddenly as he appeared, he disappeared, leaving her with unanswered questions. Amber tried to move forward with her life as best as she could, demonstrating an enviable spirit and determination. After a few months, Connor resurfaced. Likely driven by genuine affection for her only biological family member, Amber was excited when he expressed his desire to meet. They arranged a time and date and met in downtown Hamilton on the night of Friday, November 26, 2021. Overjoyed by her brother's presence, Amber took a selfie with him and posted it on her social media profile. It was the last time anyone heard from her. Around 10 p.m., security cameras captured the siblings walking together through the streets of Hamilton. At some point, out of the camera's view, Connor attacked Amber. He assaulted her, inflicted severe head and body injuries, and then strangled her until she died. About 90 minutes later, without attempting to hide the body, Connor headed back to the hostel where he was staying. Security cameras recorded his disheveled state, and footage showed him collapsing against a metal barrier. He eventually pulled himself together and disposed of his blood-stained clothes. Just before midnight, he returned to the hostel and told a staff member that he and his sister had argued. Later, another camera showed Connor going to the dumpsters outside the building with a plastic bucket in hand. He also called the Hill House Children's Unit, telling them not to worry if Amber didn't return, insisting that she was fine. Despite his assurances, the authorities reported Amber missing that same night. On Friday, November 26, 2021, retired William Corrigan took his 45-year-old son, Stephen Corrigan, to get a COVID-19 vaccine. Due to a recent fall, Stephen had his arm in a sling and needed extra support from his father. After getting vaccinated, Stephen decided to take a night walk and stumbled upon Amber's abandoned body. Rather than alerting the police, Stephen committed his own heinous acts by desecrating Amber's remains. He then concealed her body among leaves and bushes before leaving. Unaware of Amber's tragic fate, her loved ones and the authorities searched for her everywhere. Meanwhile, Connor sent a cryptic message to a group of 5 friends, saying he needed help with something without specifying details. To create an alibi, he messaged Amber, asking if she was okay. He then told his friends that he had resolved the issue on his own. As the search for Amber continued, Craig and Carol grew increasingly anxious. They hadn't heard from Connor until a call on Sunday, November 28, 2021, when he told them that he and Amber had fought the previous Friday. Later that same Sunday, the police finally discovered Amber's body. Her underwear had been torn, and she had suffered severe head trauma. After securing the scene, investigators searched the area and found Amber's blood-stained shorts and t-shirt in a nearby dumpster. After informing her loved ones of the tragic outcome, the detective team began reconstructing Amber's movements from the last time she was seen to when her life was taken and her body left in the middle of nowhere. At a press conference, one of the detectives appealed to the public for information. He emphasized the importance of understanding the events leading to Amber's fatal attack and urged anyone with information to come forward to help bring closure to her family. Knowing the community's fear and parents' concerns for their daughter's safety, he stressed that capturing the perpetrator was crucial for public safety. He pointed out that Amber was last seen in a busy part of town on a Friday night, suggesting there must have been many witnesses. He called on anyone who saw her to contact the authorities. Following the press conference, some people came forward with potential information, but none provided useful leads. Investigators continued their work, and the forensic pathologist's report highlighted that Amber was found covered in mud and had died from neck compression. Bloodstains found on her jacket were sent for DNA analysis, which revealed a chilling truth. The blood matched her brother Connor's DNA. Additionally, Connor's DNA was found on Amber's forcibly removed underwear. Another unidentified male DNA sample was also discovered, complicating the case further. With such evidence in hand, Connor became the prime suspect in the case. He continued to feign innocence and create false alibis that quickly fell apart. One such clumsy attempt was a social media post on December 1st, where he pretended to pay tribute to his sister, lavishing her with praise and claiming he would miss her dearly. The next day, he searched the internet on his phone for ways to mislead the police. He also posted several angry messages on his social media accounts. Hours later, he was arrested. Meanwhile, the details of the case were kept under strict confidentiality to avoid jeopardizing the investigation. However, some information leaked, and it became known that the victim's brother was under police scrutiny. Feeling the pressure from the police, Connor did not give up trying to distance himself from the crime. Instead, he pushed a local media outlet to publish a tribute to his sister. Forensic DNA analyses and other evidence continued to provide valuable information at a rapid pace. It was determined that Connor's clothing had traces of his sister's blood. Additionally, the analysis revealed that the third biological material belonged to Stephen Corrigan. A cybercrime expert analyzed Connor's phone and uncovered further evidence that clarified the case. Suspicious messages to his group of 5 friends and the one sent to Amber knowing he had just killed her, were particularly incriminating. His internet search history only further exposed him. As these details began to emerge publicly, the complex story of Amber's tragic end came to light. Connor had to appear in Hamilton Sheriff Court to face charges of murder, sexual assault, and attempting to pervert the course of justice. Prosecutors stated that Amber had complete trust in her brother, which he brutally betrayed by taking her life. The court ruled that Connor should remain in police custody pending further investigations and court appearances. Stephen Corrigan was also arrested shortly thereafter. On January 13, 2022, he appeared in Hamilton Sheriff Court, charged with attempting to pervert the course of justice. He pleaded not guilty. Like Connor, Stephen was held in police custody awaiting his trial. The year 2022 was filled with legal proceedings, making it an extremely challenging time for Carol and her husband Craig, who were grappling with the grief of losing Amber and the shock of Connor's possible guilt. On November 1st, 2022, which would have been Amber's 17th birthday, her friends and family celebrated her memory. They shared heartfelt messages and wishes for her eternal rest, along with photos of her on social media. Carol changed her profile picture to one of Amber, finding a measure of peace in the gesture, feeling that it symbolized having done everything possible for her. Additionally, Amber's loved ones created a memorial under a bridge near where her body was found. They placed bouquets, balloons, and candles in her honor. Unfortunately, the memorial was vandalized a few days later when vandals set fire to a nearby dumpster, causing flames to spread. In response, family and friends held a gathering in a park, releasing balloons, some shaped like the letter A for Amber, into the sky. While the wound from Amber's loss remained fresh, Connor's trial finally took place in July 2023. Throughout the trial, Connor denied any involvement in the crime and the sexual assault against his sister. Despite his denials, the evidence against him was overwhelming. His defense lawyer attempted to garner some sympathy from the court by highlighting Connor's lifelong neglect and emotional abuse, suggesting these factors could explain some of his actions. Next, the Director of Health and Social Care testified, describing the case as desperately sad and distressing. The court also heard that Connor appeared unshaken when speaking with Craig on the day Amber's body was found. Craig testified about Connor's increasingly problematic behavior. After a 13-day trial, the Glasgow High Court found Connor guilty of all 3 charges. The judge described the crime as depraved and warned Connor that he would face severe consequences. 15 days later, Stephen faced justice for his involvement. During his trial, he tried to present an unassailable alibi, claiming he spent the night at his elderly father's home and had spent much of the time playing computer games. However, the evidence against him continued to mount. Stephen also claimed that he didn't know why his DNA was found on Amber's body. While William corroborated much of his son's account, he admitted to the jury that he couldn't be certain of Stephen's actions during most of that weekend. Ultimately, Stephen was found guilty of attempting to pervert the course of justice and disturbing public order. In September 2023, during a joint hearing, both men received their sentences. Connor Gibson was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 22 years before he can be considered for parole. Stephen received a 9-year prison sentence. In a statement following the trial, Craig and Carol acknowledged that their lives would never be the same. They described Amber as the most generous, caring, compassionate, and admirable person they had ever known. Soni Millbrook was born on February 15, 1981 in Memphis, Tennessee, USA. She was the daughter of Christine Millbrook Bennett and had 2 sisters and 3 brothers, along with a large extended family. This close-knit environment allowed her to forge a special bond with her cousin Jenny. As she entered her teenage years, Soni became a popular student at her high school. In 1998, at just 17 years old and in the 8th grade, she met a man in his 20s named Lakeith Moody, with whom she soon began a relationship. Unfortunately, Lakeith was abusive, and his violent behavior left visible marks on Soni's body. Despite their tumultuous relationship, they had 4 children together, 3 girls and a boy named after his father. In 1999, Soni's mother noticed a bruise on her daughter's chest, which Soni tearfully admitted was caused by Lakeith. One of her friends also observed injuries, but Soni refused to report him. Lakeith was controlling and often tried to isolate her from friends and family. That same year, Soni moved into an apartment in the Fraser neighborhood of Memphis. One day, the apartment management notified her of a disturbance at her home. When she arrived, she found her apartment in disarray, furniture slashed, clothes missing, the television destroyed, food smeared on the walls, and personal hygiene products scattered everywhere, including down the stairs. Written on the mirror in red nail polish was the message, "Kiki loves you," Kiki being Lakeith's nickname. On October 31, 2000, Soni, her cousin Pamela, and Lakeith were at a bar called Mirage. During their time there, Lakeith slapped Soni and threw a drink in her face. Soni and Pamela left the bar and sat in the car where, according to Pamela, Soni was shaking and trembling. She asked Pamela to take her home before Lakeith arrived. Once home, Soni secured the door with locks and chains. An hour later, Lakeith arrived, yelling and banging on the door. Pamela only managed to get Lakeith to leave when she threatened to call the police. Once Soni calmed down, her cousin left her alone at home. However, later that evening, Pamela received a call informing her that Soni was in the hospital. Somehow, Lakeith had gained entry to the house. When Soni tried to end the relationship, he retaliated by tearing her clothes and beating her on the head, face, chest, arms, and between her thighs. She ended up with bruises all over her body, a loose tooth, and even lost consciousness as Lakeith Moody had choked her until she passed out. Not long after, Lakeith Moody found birth control pills in Soni's apartment and assaulted her again. The next morning, Soni called Pamela, asking for a ride to the hospital due to a miscarriage. By late 2008, at the age of 27, Soni was working at a Christian academy. She was a reliable employee who always arrived on time. Therefore, when she missed work or requested time off, it was usually for significant reasons. On one occasion, she called her employer to say she couldn't come in because her face was badly bruised and she didn't want the children to see her like that. Leslie granted her the day off. When Soni returned a few days later, her bruises were so severe that the director allowed her to wear sunglasses inside the academy. She confided in her boss about how her boyfriend had once chased her in his car, trying to force her off the road during the pursuit. Lakeith's violence wasn't limited to Soni and their children. In April 2008, he was found parked in an SUV with a firearm, despite being prohibited from possessing one as a convicted felon. He had already served 2 years in prison for theft and another 3 for drug possession with intent to sell. Despite Soni's efforts to distance herself from him, it was nearly impossible. The situation reached a critical point on October 6, 2008. That day, Soni did not show up at the academy. At 5 p.m., her boss received a text message from Soni stating that her boyfriend was holding her hostage in her own home and had been beating her all day. She then provided her address. The boss called the police, and 2 officers arrived at the residence. They knocked on the door, but it was locked from the inside and there was no response. They called the fire department, who broke down the door. When the officers entered, they saw Lakeith jumping out of an open window at the back of the apartment. Sony stood in a hallway, crying and unable to speak due to her distressed state. Her 4 children were with her, completing a heartbreaking scene. She was covered in bruises and scratches on her face and neck. Once she calmed down, Sony explained what had happened. She and Lakeith had started arguing and he refused to let her leave the house. She informed the officers that they didn't answer the door earlier because Lakeith wouldn't allow her or the children to go near it or the windows. She mentioned that Lakeith had hurt one of their children by grabbing him and had prevented her from taking him to the hospital. Sony detailed that her boyfriend had been physically and verbally abusing her, even tying a baby blanket around her neck and choking her until she lost consciousness. During the conflict, when the police arrived, Lakeith threatened to suffocate her again, promising that next time he would make sure to kill her. The officers searched the area but could not find Lakeith. Sony left the house with her children in her car. 3 days after this incident, she applied for a restraining order against Lakeith, fearing for her life and wanting to prevent any further contact with him. However, she missed the court hearing on October 23rd, and the protection order was never granted. Nearly 6 months later, on March 10, 2009, Sony was still in contact with Lakeith. That day, he was supposed to pick up the children for a doctor's appointment, but instead he started a fight with Sony, accusing her of having a new boyfriend. The argument quickly escalated as he slapped her and pulled her hair. She managed to break free and ran out of the apartment with Lakeith yelling death threats after her. Lakeith didn't catch her, but instead grabbed their youngest child, an infant, and drove off at high speed. A police patrol, alerted to the domestic disturbance, arrived just as Lakeith was fleeing. The officers attempted to stop him, but he evaded them and escaped. By early 2010, 28-year-old Sony was studying at Southeast Tennessee Community College. Her 5th child was 9 weeks old and in such fragile health that she had to stay home to care for him. In January, Lakeith, Sony, and their children moved together into the Budget Lodge Motel in Memphis. The very day they moved in, their arguments were so loud that the motel staff had to intervene because they were disturbing other guests. Peace was elusive. Their fights were constant, annoying the neighbors and the management with the noise. On January 22nd, the hotel security guard witnessed Lakeith in a highly agitated state. He arrived at high speed in Sony's car and began shouting at her while she stood on the second-floor balcony with the children. In the heat of the argument, he threw a bag of groceries at her. The guard approached and told him they couldn't make so much noise or throw objects and that they needed to finish the argument inside their room. Lakeith simply told him to mind his own business. He locked the car and walked away, with the guard following him to a third-floor room not registered under anyone's name. Later, the guard asked Lakeith to hand over any hotel keys he had, and to his surprise, Lakeith had keys to 3 different rooms despite not being registered as a guest. The next day, the troubled couple moved with their children to room 222. That evening, the night manager asked Lakeith to leave, and though he complied, he soon returned. The fights continued for a few more days until the same security guard, who had repeatedly warned them, asked Lakeith to leave the property for good. The receptionist tried to calm him down as he went to the parking lot, and the guard told him not to come back that night. Lakeith got into the car and drove away. On January 26th, Sony spoke with Pamela, confiding that many things were happening in her life and that she was staying at the motel. She expressed a desire to tell Pamela something important and said she would call if she left the motel or if her boyfriend left first. The next day started normally. At 7 a.m., Sony took her younger children to daycare and her eldest to school. Around 11 a.m., the housekeeping manager knocked on Sony's door, speaking to her through the window to inform her they needed to pay or leave. He returned several times that day. On one visit, around 2:30 p.m., Lakeith answered the door. The room was dark. Lakeith told the manager that his mother was on her way to bring the money. Later, the hotel security guard checked room 222 and found it empty. Children's clothes, bags, and various items were scattered on the floor and one of the beds, while the other bed was neatly made. That same day, January 27th, Sony failed to pick up her eldest daughter on time. The school secretary called Christine, the child's maternal grandmother, to come and get her. Christine tried calling Sony, but received no answer. Around 6 p.m., Christine discovered that her other grandchildren were still at daycare. Worried by the lack of response, she asked her husband to pick up the younger children from daycare while she went to the school. Convinced something was wrong, they contacted the police, who came to the house around 10:30 p.m. and filed a missing persons report. On January 28th, the housekeeping manager entered the now empty room 222 again. This time, he began cataloging and tagging the belongings left behind by the tenants who seemingly fled to avoid paying their bill. The room contained piles of clothes and a large garbage bag which were taken to the storage area. Once the room was emptied, it was cleaned and made available for new guests. The next occupants were James and Rhonda Sargent, who moved in on January 29th. The new tenants noticed a foul odor and tried to mask it with incense, but it wasn't enough. They also noticed that the previous occupants had attempted to do the same, as they found scented tissues in the tiles and ceiling vents. The smell was particularly strong when someone sat on the bed. On January 29th, officers from the Memphis Police Department's Missing Persons Unit visited the hotel to inquire about Sony's whereabouts, as it was the last place she had been seen. However, they did not enter room 222. Lakeith was found on February 2nd and around 7 p.m. inside Sony's car parked at a shopping center. He was arrested for vehicle theft and held in police custody for 48 hours. That night, he was questioned about Sony's disappearance. He claimed the last time he saw her was on January 26. He explained that they met around 7 a.m. in the hotel parking lot after she returned from dropping off the children at school. They went into the room, were intimate, and then went back outside. He took Sony's car keys and left the hotel. Lakeith stated that Sony planned to use her social benefits and a school loan to buy a new car, so it wasn't a problem if he kept hers. He claimed he had been living in the car since January 26th. Investigators, however, discovered that he had actually been staying at another hotel. Additionally, it was unlikely he spent nights in the car due to the snow during that period. On February 3rd, a debit card with Sony's name and several recent purchase receipts were found inside the car. That same day, the police examined the clothes placed in storage at the hotel, hoping to find DNA or other evidence, but came up empty-handed. Adding to their frustrations, Lakeith had to be released due to insufficient evidence linking him to Sony's disappearance. Meanwhile, Sony's cousin and her mother endured the painful task of going to the hotel to collect Sony's belongings. Her cousin had a terrible premonition, but found nothing to support her feelings. On February 4th, the police visited Moody's uncle's house and found a DVD player from the hotel room in Sony's wallet. Moody had given these items to his cousin. The cousin told the police that Lakeith had borrowed the DVD player on January 24th, supposedly to watch a movie, and was driving a red car that day. A few days later, the cousin saw Lakeith again and asked why he hadn't picked up the children on January 27th, but Lakeith avoided the question. When he inquired about Soni's whereabouts, Lakeith left the DVD player and wallet in a bag and left the house. As the days passed, James and Rhonda Sargent requested to be moved from room 222 due to the persistent bad odor. With no other rooms available, they moved to another hotel. Subsequent guests in room 222 also complained about the foul smell. Despite numerous cleanings and a carpet wash in early February, the odor persisted, only slightly reduced for a few days. Soni's family, especially her children, were deeply affected by her absence. Their only hope was for Soni's safe return. On February 4th, homicide detectives visited the hotel. By then, the room had been occupied and cleaned at least 3 times. The detectives did not enter the room but asked the staff if they noticed anything unusual. All responded negatively. On February 7th, James and Rhonda returned to the hotel, changing rooms 3 times, including spending one night in room 222. The sergeants informed the management that the room still reeked of the unpleasant odor. In March, a more thorough cleaning was carried out, which included the carpets, bedding, bathroom curtains, and window drapes. To everyone's dismay, the smell not only persisted but intensified. The manager discussed the issue with the security guard, and during their conversation they recalled that the former tenant, Soni, had disappeared at the end of January. The guard remembered the events from that time and suggested that the manager inspect room 222 for blood or cleaning agents. 10 minutes later, the manager returned and asked the guard to accompany him. What they discovered was shocking. The 2 men entered the room, where the manager had removed the mattress from one of the beds, leaving only the frame. The lower part of the bed frame had a sort of enclosure that prevented using the space underneath as an unsightly storage area. However, lifting the box spring revealed a large empty space where anything could be hidden from view. Looking through the solid edges of the frame, they saw something unimaginable, a decomposing body. They called the police, who arrived at the scene shortly after. The bed frame had marks all over it, and there were 2 broken wooden areas. Near the head of the bed was a towel and a cloth bag between the legs of the body, which was wearing a shirt but was naked from the waist down. The forensic team's autopsy determined that the cause of death was strangulation with a coaxial cable. The cable was wrapped around the neck, went under one arm, around the chest, and ended at the back. The forensic examiner concluded that it would have taken at least 2 to 3 minutes of continuous pressure to cause death. DNA samples matched Soni's genetic profile and female markers. Male genetic material was also found on 5 parts of the cable. The main hypothesis was that Soni had already been dead when she was reported missing, and that Lakeith had used the coaxial cable from the DVD player he had borrowed from his cousin, indicating premeditation. Lakeith was found and detained by the police shortly after, not for the discovery of Soni's body, but on a different charge, possessing a firearm despite a prior felony conviction. Nonetheless, at the time of his arrest, he was considered a person of interest since he was the last person seen with Soni alive. Additionally, he was again in Soni's car when he was arrested and sent to the detention facility in Mason. On March 18th, the police announced an internal investigation to determine how the case had unfolded so strangely. He stated that the family deserved answers and explained that while the officers were eager to resolve the case, they had pursued a different path that led away from the room. They also stated that they had ever encountered anything like this, noting that the discovery surpassed fiction and highlighting the drama of domestic violence. He regretted that the room had been cleaned and rented multiple times since Sony's death, complicating the police's evidence collection efforts. This explanation was met with skepticism. Shortly after, Rhonda, one of the first tenants to stay in the room where Sony's body was found, spoke to the media. She mentioned that if the officers had asked to enter the room during their January visit, they would have been allowed. She reasoned that, unlike her and her husband, the officers should have recognized the smell of a decomposing body and found Sony much earlier. Finally, the time came to give Sony a loving and dignified farewell. Her funeral was held on March 24th. Sony's children were placed under the care of her sister and her husband. By April 1st, they were making efforts to obtain legal guardianship of the children. She stated that while the children were the primary victims, the lives of everyone in the family were disrupted by the tragic loss. She expressed that while she couldn't bring her sister back, she was determined to care for Sony's children, ensuring they had food, clothing, and toys, and keeping them together as a family. Sony had been a beneficiary of a social program that periodically credited funds to a card for grocery purchases. The card had been loaded shortly before the crime, as part of a tax refund on her income. The police tracked the movements of this card, which was found in Lakeith's possession. This effort proved successful, revealing that the card had been used on February 1st, 4 days after Sony's disappearance, at a convenience store. Sony usually visited the store on the 1st of each month to withdraw cash using her electronic benefit transfer card. Officers went to the store and asked the owner for access to the footage from their 16 security cameras on the morning of February 1st. At 11:38, the surveillance system captured a man in yellow using Sony's card to buy a bottle of orange juice, withdraw some cash, and purchase a cigar. After making the purchases, he returned to a car driven by another person. With all the evidence against him, the trial for Lakeith began in the first week of February 2014, over 4 years after the crime. By then, the Budget Lodge Hotel had closed. Lakeith pleaded not guilty, while the prosecutor described the situation as a very ugly and tragic end to a tumultuous relationship. In contrast, the defense attorney emphasized the lack of conclusive evidence, including witnesses or material proof. He argued that there was no evidence of premeditation, only the prosecution's speculations. He pointed out that the police had found a fingerprint on the bed frame that did not match Lakeith's. He suggested that someone else might have killed Sony, as she had been involved with other men over the years. He insisted that his client had never been arrested for domestic violence against her. Additionally, he revealed something that had not been public knowledge. Sony had moved in with Lakeith again because she had to leave a relative's house due to a rat infestation. On February 6th, the video showing Lakeith using Sony's prepaid card 4 days after her death was presented in court. The defense claimed his calm demeanor during the transaction indicated innocence, while the prosecution saw it as evidence of a cold-blooded and ruthless man unbothered by the crime he had allegedly committed. On February 7th, 2014, he was found guilty of first-degree murder and was automatically sentenced to life in prison on February 10th. He appealed the sentence, arguing that the court had erred in considering past domestic violence acts and that the evidence was insufficient. On July 7, 2015, the Tennessee Court of Criminal Appeals upheld the conviction, confirming the sentences. Just 2 days before her death, a camera captured a gaunt and hollow-eyed Sophie Leonette sitting in front of a fireplace. The young au pair had been starved and tortured by her London host family for weeks. In her final photo, She appears frail and aged, though she was only 21 years old. Shortly after this photo was taken, her employers brutally beat her to death and then attempted to dispose of her body on the family grill. Why did they destroy this once vibrant girl so completely? The answer to that question is perhaps the most bizarre part of this tragic story. Sophie Lyonnais was born on January 7, 1996, in a small rural town in eastern France, home to just over 60,000 people. Her parents, Catherine and Patrick Lyonnais, went their separate ways during her childhood. After the separation, Catherine remarried, yet both she and Patrick remained in the same town, ensuring Sophie maintained a close relationship with each of them. Known for her kindness and altruism, Sophie loved animals and children, consistently striving to help others. Her interests included outdoor activities like horse riding and ice skating. She was also passionate about music and films and engaged in creating independent documentaries focused on social issues such as climate change and animal rights. Described by friends and family as shy and introverted since her youth, her love for children inspired her to pursue a childcare course after high school. However, job opportunities in her field were scarce in her hometown. At 19, encouraged by a cousin, she considered becoming an au pair to blend cultural and linguistic exchange with childcare, while exploring the world and improving her English. In 2015, Sophie connected with Sabrina Quaider and Wissem Medouni, a French couple living in the affluent Southfield area on Wimbledon Park Road in London, who were seeking a French-speaking au pair for their 2 children. She applied, was swiftly hired, and by January 2016, just after her 20th birthday, she left her small town for London, unaware of the impending terror she would face. In London, she met her employers, Sabrina, born in 1983, and Wissem, born in 1978. The couple, of Algerian descent, met in France when Sabrina was about 18, working at a fair selling crepes. Wissem, 5 years her senior, fell for her at first sight. Though initially uninterested, Sabrina faced relentless pursuit from Wissem, who was captivated by her exotic beauty and charismatic presence. Despite her volatile and manipulative nature, they embarked on a tumultuous and toxic relationship that lasted 17 years. In 2004, at 22, Sabrina moved to London seeking a better future, initially working as an au pair with aspirations to enter the fashion industry. Wissem followed her to London. Having studied economics at the University of Paris, he quickly secured a job with the London branch of a French bank. At this point, the couple was not married. Their relationship was tumultuous, marked by frequent breakups and reconciliations, with Sabrina firmly in control. While together, Sabrina was often unfaithful, leaving Wissem for other men but always returning, and he would take her back without question. Around 2008, Sabrina had her first child, though details about the child, including the father's identity, the exact age, and the name, remain unclear. During her time in London, Sabrina worked various jobs while trying to break into the fashion and makeup industry. Her big break came in 2011 when she was involved in a pyramid sales scheme for a telecommunications company and met Mark Walton at a bank in Notting Hill. Mark, a former member of the Irish boy band Boyzone, fell deeply in love with Sabrina and they began dating. This relationship opened doors for Sabrina in the celebrity world, leading to work as a makeup artist for celebrities. She later expanded into designing and songwriting. Sabrina and Mark's relationship lasted 2 years, during which she allegedly had a second child in the United States, supposedly with Mark. Mark later described Sabrina as pathologically jealous, accusing him of infidelity with male sex workers and even installing hidden cameras to spy on him. After her time with Mark, Sabrina returned to London and resumed her relationship with Ouissem, who welcomed her back with open arms. With Ouissem working at the bank and Sabrina's success as a makeup artist and designer, the couple enjoyed a comfortable and even luxurious lifestyle in an affluent London neighborhood. However, beneath the surface, their relationship remained toxic. Though they were married under a traditional Muslim ceremony, Sabrina openly ridiculed their marriage, referring to Ouissem as a relative or friend while continuing to date other men. Their life together was filled with loud arguments, with Sabrina never shy about expressing her dissatisfaction. Despite this, they never parted ways, perpetuating their cycle of conflict. Neighbors viewed Sabrina and Ouissem as antisocial and strange. Sabrina always appeared glamorous and well-dressed, but the couple was unfriendly and inconsiderate, often leaving trash outside for days, blocking neighbors' driveways with their cars and failing to pay rent on time. Sabrina remained fixated on her ex, Mark, accusing him of bizarre and false actions such as sexually abusing a non-existent cat, using black magic against her, and hiring a helicopter to spy on her. The police received over 30 reports from Sabrina about Mark, all of which were unfounded. Her obsession escalated to the point where she received a police warning for creating a fake social media profile to harass Mark, primarily accusing him of being a child abuser. It later emerged that Sabrina suffered from depression and borderline personality disorder, causing her to experience severe mood swings, delusions, and paranoia. Although Ouissem did not suffer from any psychological disorders, Sabrina managed to convince him that her accusations were true. Into this chaotic and unstable environment stepped the young and naive Sophie, in search of a dream that would soon turn into a nightmare. Initially, Sophie's experience as an au pair was pleasant and positive. The children adored her and were easy to care for. She earned €50 a week and befriended other nannies in the area. In phone calls with her mother, Sophie seemed happy and content with how things were going. She got along well with Sabrina, often chatting over tea at the kitchen table. Sabrina, who loved doing hair and makeup, even gave Sophie a makeover. However, this camaraderie and apparent tranquility did not last long. Gradually, Sabrina's violent and abusive side began to emerge. The treatment of Sophie turned abusive, starting with shouting and insults over simple mistakes like tripping, breaking a glass, or not having meals ready on time. This escalated to physical attacks, including slaps and hair pulling as punishment, always explosive and unpredictable. Sophie, being shy and passive, did not know how to react to the abuse. She had never faced such a situation before, and aggression was not in her nature. She kept silent, cried in her room, and tried to comply, but there was no way to satisfy Sabrina, who had already marked her as a victim of her violent delusions. The abuse intensified, and soon Sophie was denied food, leading to rapid weight loss. With physical weakness came mental exhaustion. On top of everything, the couple confiscated her passport and stopped paying her. Sophie found herself held against her will in a house where she was subjected to relentless torment. Despite everything, Sophie tried to seek help in her own way. On one occasion, she told the owner of a fast food restaurant that she was being beaten, but received no response. She also tried to go to the house of some family acquaintances, but Sabrina followed her and, after causing a scene, forced her to return. The owner of a fish and chips restaurant in the area recalled seeing Sophie in his establishment a couple of times, alone and visibly distressed. When he asked her what was wrong, she said that her mother was sick. Since Sophie was very shy and had limited English skills. She rarely spoke with people she didn't know well. She had written and talked to her family about possibly returning home earlier than planned, and her parents were aware of the household tensions, but they had no idea how serious the situation was. Feeling trapped with no one to turn to, Sophie was paralyzed by fear and manipulated by the couple to the point where she felt incapable of escaping. This ordeal lasted for about a year, with the abuse intensifying over time. By April 2017, approximately 15 months into her job, her mother Catherine noticed during a phone call that Sophie seemed unhappy and weary, expressing a desire to come home. On August 8th, Sophie called her family again, crying and sounding confused. She told her mother she needed £40 for a ticket. Sophie received the money and bought a return ticket for September 18th, 2017. Unfortunately, she would never get to use it. Sabrina's paranoid delusions and obsession with Mark intertwined with the abuse towards Sophie. She began to believe that Sophie and Mark were plotting against her, accusing the nanny of sleeping with him and being a child abuser. She also claimed Sophie was spying for Mark, planning to help him enter their home to drug and sexually assault her, Wissem, and the children. These accusations were baseless, but Sabrina convinced Wissem they were true. Initially, Wissem would look the other way when Sabrina yelled at or hit Sophie, but he eventually started actively participating in the abuse. Sabrina told Sophie she could only leave if she admitted to working for Mark, but Sophie refused to acknowledge this. In an attempt to extract a confession, they subjected her to hours of inhumane treatment and interrogation. They dunked her in the bathtub, beat her with cables, and threatened her with sexual assault. These sessions were recorded on their cell phones, resulting in 8 hours of footage. The brutal duo finally broke Sophie, who confessed to an affair with Mark, a man she had never met and who had been living in Los Angeles since 2015. Sophie believed that telling Sabrina what she wanted to hear would secure her release, but it did not. In fact, her nightmare intensified. On September 19, 2017, after nearly 2 years of working for the couple, 21-year-old Sophie was savagely beaten in the bathroom, resulting in her death. The following afternoon, on Wednesday the 20th, Wissem lit a bonfire to burn Sophie's body, adding chicken and meat to mask the smell. However, neighbors called the British emergency number due to the thick smoke and strong odor emanating from the garden. Authorities arrived at the residence around 6:20 p.m. By then, the bonfire had been burning for approximately 3 hours. One of the first firefighters on the scene quickly sensed something was amiss. As he extinguished the flames, he noticed what appeared to be human remains, including what looked like a nose, along with some clothes and jewelry. When he questioned Wissem about the fire, the man claimed he was burning a sheep carcass he had bought, explaining that the remains were from the animal. The firefighter observed that Wissem seemed uncomfortable and resigned when responding. Police officers at the scene recovered the charred remains in a pair of melted glasses. Just 2 days later, Sabrina and Wissem were arrested on suspicion of murder. On September 26th, they appeared before the criminal court. At this time, Sophie's remains had not been officially identified, although the press had already reported her as the victim of the horrific crime. Sabrina cried throughout the hearing and interrupted to declare her innocence. Although both admitted to attempting to dispose of the body, neither took responsibility for Sophie's death and blamed each other. In his initial statement, Wissem claimed Sophie died accidentally during an interrogation in the bathroom. However, he later recanted, saying he made that statement to protect Sabrina. His revised account stated that Sabrina woke him, saying Sophie was not breathing, and he found her lifeless in the bathroom. Sabrina's defense acknowledged she had hit Sophie on several occasions but maintained that the girl died in her sleep. After hearing both sides, the judge set the trial date for March 19, 2018. Sabrina and Wissem were remanded to prison while the police continued their investigation. No bail was requested. According to the pathologist involved in the investigation, the body was so severely burned that determining the victim's sex and age was initially impossible. On October 3rd, 2 weeks after the incident, DNA tests confirmed the remains were those of Sophie. The autopsy revealed that at the time of her death, she had a broken jaw, a fractured sternum, and 5 broken ribs, injuries sustained within the last 36 hours of her life. Due to the extensive burns, the exact cause of death could not be determined. However, it was established that she might have died from a head injury, neck constriction, or drowning. The trial began on March 19, 2018. Sophie's parents traveled to London with financial support from the French government to attend the hearings in person. The prosecutor Richard Horwell argued before the jury that the couple had killed Sophie out of vengeance, aiming to punish a man the young Frenchwoman had never met. He described Sabrina's accusations against Sophie as pure, delusional fantasy and characterized Wissem as a weak, submissive, and docile man. Another prosecutor added that while only Sabrina and Wissem knew exactly how they killed Sophie, it was proven that she died as a result of sustained violence, not an accident. The forensic psychologist testified that Sophie had been horrifically interrogated for at least 12 days, as evidenced by videos found on the couple's cell phones. She also stated that Sabrina admitted to having sex near the body of her victim, claiming Wissem forced her, which demonstrated severe dissociation and a lack of remorse. The jury was shown several videos of the interrogations. In one, dated September 11th, 9 days before the crime, Sabrina could be heard yelling at the victim, accusing her of destroying everything. She also prayed aloud, asking God not to make her touch Sophie, saying she didn't want to dirty her hands. Another recording from September 18th, 2017, shortly before Sophie's death, showed her making a confession. The footage revealed her emaciated and broken state, and the prosecution argued that this confession was not given voluntarily. Richard Horwell described the actions of the accused as a campaign of intimidation, martyrdom, and violence that completely destroyed young Sophie. He stated that the couple's plan was to dispose of the body, claim the nanny had returned to France, and deny any involvement in her disappearance. Sabrina was identified as the mastermind behind the plot due to her obsessive fixation on Mark. Wissem, initially a follower, became a willing accomplice in the crime. Mark, contacted by the London police on September 21st, flew from Los Angeles to testify against Sabrina. During his testimony, he explained that he and Sabrina had been in a relationship for 2 years. He acknowledged having been deeply in love but described Sabrina as extremely volatile and unpredictable. Mark detailed how she would go into fits of rage, causing scenes regardless of where they were. During the hearings, it was revealed that Sabrina had employed nannies before, but she always fired them, suspecting them of theft and flirting with him. The musician also confirmed that the first time he heard of Sophie was when the London police contacted him after the crime. Regarding the defense, Sabrina's lawyers leveraged Wissem's initial statement to attack him and defend Sabrina. She reminded the court that Wissem had claimed he hit Sophie in the face, causing her head to strike the tiles, rendering her unconscious and slipping under the water. Sabrina's lawyer added that when Wissem realized Sophie was unresponsive, he dragged her out and tried to revive her, but failed. During the sentencing hearing, A letter of apology from Sabrina to Sophie and her family was read. In the letter, Sabrina expressed that she and Sophie had shared many good times and sorrows together until things went tragically wrong. She stated that she thought about Sophie every day and was saddened and shocked by her absence from the world. Sabrina described the situation as a horrible nightmare from which she wished to awaken, living each day with sadness and regret over that dreadful night. She also mentioned living without hope and being deeply disappointed in herself, concluding with a wish for Sophie to rest in peace with God. In an attempt to gain leniency for his client, Sabrina's lawyer argued that her actions were driven by her delusions and personality disorders, which left her with an irrational and overwhelming fear that Sophie was conspiring against her and her family with Mark. While the judge acknowledged that the couple suffered from a shared psychosis and that Sabrina, in particular, had severe delusions and was the driving force, this did not excuse the atrocious treatment and violent death of Sophie. The prosecution successfully convinced the jury of Sabrina and Uisem's guilt. On May 24, 2018, after a 2-month trial and 6 days of deliberation, the couple was found guilty of the murder of Sophie Leonek. Sabrina and Uisem were sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 30 years. Announcing his decision, the judge stated that both had subjected Sophie to unbearable suffering, making her believe she would drown unless she gave them the information they sought. The judge emphasized that Sabrina's motive was to make Sophie and Mark suffer without any justification. He was convinced that the accused knew their method of interrogation was unacceptable, that it was illegal to assault her, and that Sophie was in a deplorable state at the time of her death. Upon hearing the verdict, Sabrina broke down in tears while Uisem sat motionless, staring at his lap. Sophie's parents also addressed the murderers. Catherine stated that no God would forgive them for what they had done, and Patrick declared that they had not only taken his daughter's life, but had also stolen his own. On June 2, 2018, nearly 9 months after her death, Sophie's body was repatriated to her homeland. Her remains were brought to a funeral chapel for a private gathering of her family before the service. A few days later, on June 6th, her funeral was held at the Saint Denis Cathedral, attended by over 150 people. Patrick, her father, said that Sophie was very loving, fond of children and animals. He was heartbroken to know that she suffered abuse until the end of her life. Her aunt described her as a sweet and gentle girl who loved everyone and cherished making people happy. Approximately 16 days after the verdict against those responsible for Sophie's death, Uisem's defense appealed, citing a supposed note from the jury members to the judge during their deliberations. According to the lawyer, the note expressed uncertainty about Uisem's intentions during the events leading to Sophie's death between September 18th and 21, 2017. They also argued that the minimum sentence was too long. Sabrina's lawyer made a similar appeal. However, both appeals were rejected in January 2019. In 2014, during a routine traffic stop in Smith County, Mississippi, an incredibly disturbing case came to light. The police were drawn to a truck due to a strong odor emanating from it. As the officer asked the driver for his paperwork, he observed that the man appeared anxious and confused. The vehicle reeked of decay, and upon further investigation, the driver was identified as 37-year-old Timothy Jones, Jr. The situation became even more concerning when the officers learned that Jones had 5 children. Yet, the truck was empty, containing only some clothing items. When asked about his children, Jones initially denied having any, then changed his story, claiming he had 3 children who were supposedly in South Carolina. This inconsistency raised suspicions, prompting the officer to detain Jones for further questioning. What they discovered rendered them speechless. Timothy Jones Jr. and Amber Kaiser, a divorced couple with 5 children all under the age of 9, Mara Grace, Elias Xavier, Natan Hayside, Gabriel Asher, and Elaine Marie. They lived in Lexington, South Carolina. When Amber met Timothy, she was drawn to his world and felt connected to him and his lifestyle. They were teenagers when they met and married very young. Timothy attended school in Mississippi while Amber focused on homemaking. From a young age, Timothy witnessed his mother's mental health deteriorate due to schizophrenia. She eventually required constant care and left home to work in intimate services, with his family telling Timothy she had simply gone far away and abandoned him. His father, Timothy Jones Sr., who was 20 at the time, moved with Timothy to his grandmother's house, where he was exposed to domestic violence, substance abuse, and alcohol. Despite his tough upbringing, Timothy showed a talent for numbers, solving math problems with ease, and could disassemble and reassemble computers to make them faster. He seemed to have a natural understanding of how machines worked. However, things changed when Timothy reached adolescence and began hearing voices at the age of 10. By middle school, he had started using drugs and drinking excessively. At 15, he suffered a traumatic brain injury in a car accident, which affected his frontal lobe, the brain area controlling impulses and linked to psychopathy in various studies. After the accident, Timothy's behavior became erratic and stubborn. He was also very jealous of his father, feeling that anyone who had a relationship with him took away his father's attention. Over time, Timothy believed his father didn't love him and feared he would end up abandoned. Despite his growing intelligence, his emotional development was stunted, leaving him with the mentality of a child and lacking common sense and empathy. After finishing high school, Timothy Jones Jr. dreamed of joining the elite U.S. Navy SEALs. His intelligence earned him a chance to study there, but he faced a major hurdle. He lacked athletic talent and discipline, lasting only a few weeks in training. Often found crying out of frustration, he struggled to keep up with the rigorous demands. This led to depression, and a subsequent drug test revealed substance abuse, resulting in his expulsion. In 2000, Timothy began associating with individuals involved in bad things. One day, the police found him in possession of illegal substances and discovered he had been writing checks in his father's name. The police warned Jones's father that he had to press charges against his son or face arrest himself. In 2001, Timothy Jones Jr. was sent to a labor camp in an Illinois state prison for a year. Upon release, he seemed transformed, having found religion as a guiding force in his life. He memorized significant portions of religious texts and aspired to live strictly by them. Jones met Amber, the mother of his children, while they both worked at an amusement park in Chicago. After some time, in 2004, he invited her to his Pentecostal church. Within weeks, they decided to marry, adhering to the church's expectation for immediate marriage. Amber was 19 and Timothy was 22. Soon, Amber realized the church's strictness. Women couldn't cut their hair, wear pants, makeup, or jewelry, and Timothy believed that women should be submissive to their husbands, be fruitful, and multiply. Timothy was deeply religious, dedicating himself entirely to the church. Many advised him against taking the Bible literally, but he remained steadfast. The young couple quickly had 3 children, Mara, Elias, and Natan, each born a year apart. With their growing family, they moved to Mississippi, where Timothy eventually graduated with highest honors from the state university, earning a degree in computer science and engineering. Timothy Jones Jr. managed all of this while being married, having children, and working various jobs. His family couldn't have been prouder. Tim was truly a remarkable genius with a promising future. Everything seemed to be going well for him. He landed a job as a computer chip manufacturer at Intel, which Amber saw as their ticket to a better life. After living in student housing in Mississippi, they dreamed of raising their 3 children in a bigger house and even considered hiring a nanny. Unfortunately, things didn't go as planned. Tim chose to buy a rundown trailer on a dirt road in Red Bank because he dreamed of living on a farm. He bought animals to raise, and Amber stayed home with the kids and the animals in this isolated area. She didn't have a car or know how to drive. By 2012, the couple had 2 more children, and problems began to arise. Tim doubted the paternity of their youngest daughter, Elaine, and wanted Amber to homeschool the children, though she only had a high school education. Amber felt increasingly isolated with no family nearby and Tim's family in Mississippi. She felt inferior to her intelligent and educated husband. Tensions escalated when Tim accused Amber of having an affair with a neighbor. The marriage crumbled and they considered divorce. Tim didn't want Amber in the children's lives, so he visited a therapist and asked for a sworn statement for his divorce lawyer, claiming he was fit to raise the children alone. Amber, without a lawyer and unsure what to do, eventually decided it was best for the children to stay with their father, as she had nothing to offer, no job or education. Tim gained primary custody as the sole financial provider, and Amber was granted regular visitation rights. She left her husband and children. Mentally, Tim was losing control, anguished by his failed marriage. He began using drugs and drinking again, struggling with the voices in his head. He became easily angered over minor things, and Amber reported that he once beat her in front of their children until she lost consciousness. Unable to manage work and home, he hired a nanny service. Despite his condition, the first 2 nannies noted that his home was immaculate, and he was dedicated and attentive to his children. Later, he switched services and hired 17-year-old Crystal, who had a young daughter. The nanny soon became his lover, and Tim tried to indoctrinate her into his religion, insisting she adopt the church's customs, wearing long dresses, growing her hair out, and being subordinate to him. When she refused, their relationship deteriorated. Crystal later testified that Tim was extremely harsh with his children, making them stand on their toes for hours as he believed punishment was necessary for their sick bodies. She left after catching him trying to hit her young daughter. After Crystal left, Tim hired another nanny. She noticed a drastic change in Tim. His once clean home was now filled with trash and dirty clothes, and there were even cockroaches. Over time, Timothy Jones Jr. became increasingly violent, punishing his children daily. He developed the habit of feeding them only oatmeal throughout the day, limiting them to 1 meal. In August 2014, the nanny contacted South Carolina's social services to report the conditions in Tim's home. She described the lack of food and the physical abuse the children suffered. The abuse was so severe that the teachers at the elementary school, attended by the older children, had already reported it to the agency months earlier. The agency had previously required Jones to sign a written promise never to mistreat or hit his children again, as they often arrived at school with bruises. When asked about the injuries, the children said their father would grab them by the neck and slam them against the wall. On the afternoon of Thursday, August 28, 2014, Tim picked up his 3 older children from elementary school, then his 2 younger ones from the nanny. Around 7 p.m., Timothy got angry about some broken outlets in their mobile home. He questioned his 6-year-old son, Natan, about the damage. When Natan said he didn't know, Timothy forced Natan to do push-ups, squats, and other exercises before having him repeat the circuit over and over again. Whenever Natan would slow down, Timothy would whip him with a belt. While Natan was being punished, Amber, Tim's ex-wife, called to speak with her children. The calls were logged at 7 o'clock, 7:02, 7:05, and 7:09, until Timothy finally answered at 7:10. During the call, Natan told his mother about the punishment for the broken outlets, saying it was an accident. Enraged, Timothy ended the call, telling Amber to stop protecting the boy. After hours of torture, Natan was exhausted, dehydrated, and begging for it to end. He collapsed, putting an end to it all. Timothy carried him to bed and left him alone without water or aid. Phone records show that Amber tried to call back 8 more times. At 8:30, Timothy searched for an explicit scene from the movie American History on YouTube, despite knowing his son was already unresponsive. Around 1 a.m., Jones took his 8-year-old daughter, Mara, to a local convenience store to buy 10 packs of cigarettes. Upon returning home, he grabbed Mara and began to strangle her. Next, Timothy went to his 7-year-old son, Elias, and did the same thing. After that, he removed his belt and went to Gabriel, who was 2, and Elaine, who was 1. He placed the belt around their necks and pulled until they stopped breathing. Seeing that none of the children were moving, he took their sheets and blankets, wrapped them separately, and placed them in the back seat of his car. On Friday, August 29th, Jones's father called him at around 7:43 a.m., but there was no answer. At 9:36, the nanny called, and on her second attempt, Jones answered. She asked if he would be dropping the younger kids at daycare, and he told her not to worry, saying he would take them next week, mentioning that they were out and would return by Tuesday. That morning, he drove from place to place. Between noon and 2 p.m., he searched online for drugs out of state. At 12:17, Jones was near Alabama, and his grandmother called him multiple times, but he did not answer and continued to ignore her messages throughout the day, totaling 23 attempts. Between 3 and 5 p.m., Jones searched online for tobacco shops in Alabama and Mississippi and for camping sites in South Carolina. At 8:04 p.m., his location was recorded in Georgia. The next day, August 30th, his grandmother continued sending messages, asking why he wasn't responding to her calls. His phone's location was recorded in Red Bank, New Jersey. On August 31st at 10:08 a.m., Jones searched the internet for camping stores and RV parks in South Carolina landfills, Lexington County landfills, and animal services, in addition to 2 songs. At 4:54 p.m., the nanny texted Timothy Jones Jr. to remind him to bring diapers when he dropped off Gabriel and Elaine on Tuesday. An hour later, he replied, saying he had left South Carolina with the children to start fresh, and asked her to clean the mobile home, offering her to take whatever she wanted from the belongings he left behind. His ex-wife called him at 7 p.m., but he did not answer. On September 1st, he was driving from place to place. The next morning at 10:35, he searched the internet for body in landfill, how to make muriatic acid, camping near Colombia, countries with no extradition laws, and facing legal problems, where should I run? Throughout the day, he received text messages from the nanny informing him she had cleaned the mobile home. His boss at Intel also messaged him, asking if he was coming to work. At around 6 p.m., Amber called, but he did not answer. On the morning of September 3rd, a co-worker called twice without getting a response. Later, Timothy was captured on surveillance video at a well-known store, buying a saw, muriatic acid, garbage bags, a 5-gallon bucket, and goggles. At 3:37 a.m., he searched online for Tim Jones's missing children. His location was recorded in Charleston, South Carolina. At 6:33 a.m. on September 4th, he was seen at a bank, depositing a check for $3,518. The next day, September 5th, his location was tracked to Louisville, Georgia. His phone was only turned on once that day. On the morning of September 6th, Jones placed the decomposing bodies of his children in black plastic garbage bags and left them in a clearing along a forest road in a rural area in Alabama. This was recorded at 9:14 a.m. The bodies had been in the back seat of Timothy Jones Jr.'s vehicle since August 29th. By 7 p.m. on September 6th, he was stopped at a traffic checkpoint in Smith County, Mississippi. A police officer approached the vehicle and noticed a putrid odor emanating from inside. Additionally, the carpet appeared to be stained with bleach, as if it had been recently cleaned. The sheriff requested Jones's identification and the car's registration. He observed that Jones seemed to be under the influence of drugs. Upon checking his information, the police officer found out he was wanted in South Carolina over a child welfare issue. When asked about his children's whereabouts, Jones first claimed he had no children, then said he had 3 children who were in South Carolina. The officers asked for the phone numbers of his father, grandmother, and ex-wife to verify the children's safety. After making the calls, they immediately arrested Jones. The police mentioned that as soon as Jones was placed in the patrol car, he became emotional and started telling the officers what he had done to the children. He explained that he felt a deep sorrow and angered because one of his sons was playing with an electrical outlet. He grabbed the boy by the neck and choked him until he passed out. After that, he did the same to his other son, using a belt because his hands were too large. When his eldest daughter walked in and saw what was happening, he grabbed her and choked her with his hands until she turned purple. In another account, Jones said that when he saw his son playing with the electrical outlet, he believed the boy was trying to harm him, which led him to kill his son. In an audio recording, investigators are heard discussing how Timothy Jones Jr. forced his 6-year-old son, Nathan, to do hours of physical exercises after the boy accidentally turned off the electrical outlets in the family's living room. Jones told investigators that he eventually sent Nathan to bed, only to find him dead later when he checked on him. When asked why he did it, Jones mentioned that he killed his children because he heard voices in his head and believed his children were conspiring against him. He also thought his children would be happier in heaven. During his days on the run, Jones traveled through the Southeast with the bodies of his 5 children under blankets in his car. He ultimately dumped their bodies in a remote forest in Alabama before being arrested by chance during a routine traffic stop in Mississippi. By September 9th, after giving his second statement, Tim claimed he didn't mean to do it. He said the punishment imposed on Nathan got out of hand, and when he went to the boy's room, he found him lifeless due to the strenuous exercises. Not knowing what to do, he decided to end the lives of all his children. The pathologist mentioned that after the autopsy, she couldn't definitively establish the cause of death. However, she suggested that Nathan might have been so weakened from the excessive exercise that it didn't take much force for his father to finish him off. Investigators questioned why Jones didn't call 911 if it was truly an accident. Instead, he tried to hide and dispose of his children. That same day, Tim agreed to lead investigators to the location where he had dumped the bodies. On September 10th, the remains of his 5 children were recovered. On September 11th, the evidence collected from Jones's car was turned over to South Carolina authorities. Among the items cataloged were family photos, children's clothing, drawings by the children, letters to the children written by their mother Timothy Jones's diploma from Mississippi State University, and Jones's passport. There were also handwritten notes by Timothy Jones Jr., which included to-do lists such as removing bodies, grinding bones into powder or small pieces, burning bodies, and items like camping supplies, gas, and muriatic acid. On September 13, 2014, Jones was admitted to a correctional institution and placed in a special cell, away from the general population. Since his incarceration, Jones has been evaluated by mental health professionals, including psychiatrists, clinical psychologists, and forensic experts. Opinions among these professionals varied. Some diagnosed him with schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, schizoaffective disorder, or personality disorder, suggesting that his mental state at the time of the crime might have been worsened by drug use and the traumatic brain injury he suffered at 15, which could have contributed to an underlying psychosis. These theories were presented to the jury during the trial. However, other specialists argued that Tim was mentally competent and that his actions to conceal evidence, including his children, indicated that he knew he had done something morally and legally wrong. His internet search history further suggested he knew exactly what he was doing and what needed to be done. The prosecution argued that Tim cracked under the stress of a broken marriage and the demands of caring for 5 young children. According to his statements, the trigger for his actions was his wife's alleged infidelity with their neighbor at the time, who is now her husband. She testified that she never committed adultery and that her relationship with the neighbor began after her divorce. The trial took place in late May 2019, involving weeks of intense testimonies and evidence presented against Timothy. The crime is considered one of the worst murders in South Carolina's history. Mara's last words to her father were, "Daddy, I love you." When police searched the house after the crime, they found Natan's favorite toy from Toy Story, broken into pieces. Natan seemed to be the most severely punished, yet all testimonies agreed on one thing: the children loved their father. On June 13, 2019, after 2 hours of deliberation, Timothy Jones Jr. was sentenced to death. He is currently in solitary confinement at a correctional institution, wearing a green jumpsuit that identifies him as a death row inmate. This tragic case ended the lives of innocent children due to marital problems, with both the father and mother making irreversible mistakes. On the afternoon of April 23, 2006, a tragic scene was uncovered in a quiet home. Mark Richardson, age 42, and his wife Deborah, age 48, were found deceased in their basement. Upstairs, their 8-year-old son, Tyler Jacob, was also found lifeless. Alarmingly, the couple's 12-year-old daughter, Jasmine, was not found at the scene, sparking immediate fears for her safety. However, as the investigation unfolded, it became apparent that the circumstances were far more sinister than anyone initially suspected. Today's story is set in Medicine Hat, a small city about 200 miles southeast of Calgary, known as Canada's sunniest spot. It's a lively town favored by young, outdoorsy families, offering plenty of natural beauty and activities. The Richardson family enjoyed all the perks of life here. Deborah and Mark Richardson, along with their children, 8-year-old Tyler and 12-year-old Jasmine, represented a typical family unit. Deborah and Mark originally met in 1990 at a gym in Ontario where they both attended classes, including one for substance abuse recovery. They had conquered their past addictions by the time they met, and after moving to Medicine Hat, they started their family with Jasmine, followed by Tyler 4 years later. Their life in Medicine Hat was peaceful. Their home was modest, and both children were thriving and healthy. Jasmine, especially, was doing well in school and was known as an honor student at just 11 years old. She was cheerful, pretty, and had a contagious smile, much like her mother. However, as Jasmine entered her teenage years, her personality began to shift, a common scenario for many teens. Although she started this phase as a happy, church-going student, her demeanor changed dramatically when she discovered the internet. While she continued to be bubbly and friendly in person, online she adopted a completely different persona. Jasmine became active on social media platforms like MySpace, where her profile gradually shifted from light and girly to a darker, gothic theme. She also joined Vampire Freaks, a site aimed at connecting those interested in goth, punk, and emo subcultures. Her profile showcased her in thick eyeliner, alternative clothes, and posing with prop guns. Jasmine's social media profiles were a clear window into her teenage interests: piercings, tattoos, Tim Burton movies, toy guns, and loud music were all the rage among emo teens in the mid-2000s. She used a made-up name and claimed she was 15. She liked talking to older people, trying to seem as mature as they were. Her parents did their best to help her through these tough changes by suggesting they spend more time together and find activities they could all enjoy. But Jasmine wasn't interested. She saw her younger brother Tyler as a bother and hardly spoke to him anymore. Jasmine could spend hours at her computer, chatting with people she'd never met in person. Her parents, Deborah and Mark, believed this was just a phase. They thought she would eventually grow out of it and become more sensible. So they were pretty lenient about her new interests. She regularly attended local music shows that catered to the younger crowd. Jasmine, only 12, would typically go to these events with a group of her friends. However, it was at one of these punk rock concerts that things began to take a troubling turn. At this show, Jasmine met a 23-year-old named Jeremy Steinke. Jeremy was a troubled individual. He had dropped out of high school after enduring severe bullying and had since refused to seek employment. Instead, he lived in a trailer park with his mother, who struggled with alcoholism and had unstable relationships, leading to a revolving door of men in their home. These men were often abusive towards Jeremy, adding to his difficult circumstances. Jeremy had a tough life, often facing physical abuse from his mother's boyfriends. At 23 years old in 2006, he was without a job and spent most of his time chatting online with much younger girls. Jeremy saw himself as a bit of an oddball, a view that his friends agreed with, especially when he shared some strange facts about himself. For instance, Jeremy claimed to enjoy the taste of blood and said he drank it regularly. He even carried a vial of blood around his neck for whenever he felt the urge to indulge in this unusual craving. Jeremy also had a peculiar claim that he was a 300-year-old werewolf. This strange assertion left many skeptical, especially because Medicine Hat had seen many full moons without any incidents, leading some to dismiss his claim as nonsense. Jasmine first encountered Jeremy at a local punk rock concert where she falsely told him she was 15, though she was really just 12 years old. Despite the age difference, this did not seem to bother Jeremy, who had a preference for younger girls because he found them easier to influence and control. They started exchanging messages across various social media platforms. As the months passed, Jeremy and Jasmine's conversations became more frequent and intense. Jeremy's alternative lifestyle and interests began to shape Jasmine, pushing their chats into a disturbingly romantic direction. Influenced by Jeremy, Jasmine started to embrace a darker, gothic lifestyle. Jeremy's declaration of love was extreme. He gave Jasmine a vial of his own blood, similar to one he wore. This relationship soon became known to Jasmine's parents, who were understandably shocked and worried upon discovering her involvement with an older man. They promptly grounded her and confiscated her computer to cut off communication. To help Jasmine break away from what they saw as a harmful relationship, they decided to seek the help of a psychologist. They truly believed that counseling would repair and strengthen their bond with their daughter. To their relief, it seemed to work. Jasmine appeared to be cooperating and moving back towards a more normal life. She promised her past behaviors were behind her, and so her parents gave her computer back. This decision, however, would tragically lead to their undoing. But did Jasmine cut ties with Jeremy? Not at all. They soon reconnected, this time more secretive than before. Jeremy was infuriated by her parents' interference, expressing his anger through dark, aggressive poetry. He even fantasized about dramatic and violent actions against her parents, echoing a disturbingly romantic notion of eliminating obstacles to their relationship. Jasmine, perhaps influenced by Jeremy's intense emotions, also expressed extreme sentiments in her messages, joking about drastic actions against her own parents to be with Jeremy. While it's common for teenagers to express frustration with their parents, the context here was far more serious, given Jeremy's manipulative nature and his influence over Jasmine. This situation was not just teenage melodrama. It was being shaped by Jeremy's dark fantasies, blurring the line between jest and potential reality. The Richardson family continued their daily lives, seemingly content. Mark and Deborah were relieved to see their daughter Jasmine showing signs of improvement, and their son Tyler was enjoying his carefree childhood as a cheerful 8-year-old. Unknown to them, a sinister plan was being formed behind a computer screen, with Jasmine involved in plotting against her own family. Jasmine often complained to her friends about how much her parents annoyed her, expressing a desire to end their lives, but nobody took her seriously. On the night of Saturday, April 22, 2006, as Mrs. Richardson was getting ready for bed, she heard a noise in the basement and thought it might be rats. She went downstairs to check, flipped on the light, and to her shock, saw a person in a ski mask standing there. She screamed in fright, and the masked person rushed at her, trying to silence her. Despite his efforts, Deborah fought back, screaming even louder. The attacker then stabbed her repeatedly with a knife. Hearing his wife's screams, Mark grabbed the nearest thing he could find, a screwdriver he had left out from fixing an outlet earlier that day, and ran to the basement. He arrived to find his wife in a pool of blood and confronted the attacker, only to be stabbed in the stomach and then multiple times more. As he lay dying, Mark asked, "Why?" The attacker coldly responded, "Because your daughter wished it." Upstairs, their young son Tyler was left alone, sitting on his bed in his pajamas, too scared to move as he heard the footsteps approaching his room. The door then slowly opened. The next day, on a calm Sunday, April 23, 2006, the neighborhood was quiet, with families engaged in their usual weekend activities. It was a typical Sunday with children playing outside, including a boy who decided to visit his friend Tyler. However, when he knocked on the door of the Richardsons' home, no one answered, even though their car was parked in the driveway. Puzzled, the boy peeked through a basement window and was startled to see a motionless figure on the floor. Alarmed, he rushed home to inform his mother, who promptly called the police. The police arrived to find the door unlocked and the house disturbingly quiet. Their investigation began in the basement, where they discovered the lifeless bodies of Deborah and Mark Richardson in a gruesome scene, surrounded by pools of their own blood. Deborah had been stabbed 12 times in the chest, and Mark had suffered 24 wounds to his chest and back. The tragedy extended further as the police found Tyler's body in his bedroom, surrounded by blood-soaked toys, with multiple stab wounds and his throat cut. As the officers surveyed the scene, family photos hinted at a missing member, Jasmine. Initially, it seemed like a brutal home invasion, possibly involving Jasmine's abduction. An Amber Alert was issued for the missing girl as police started to investigate, beginning with her school and friends. A shocking discovery came when they accessed Jasmine's school locker. Among her belongings, they found a disturbing stick figure drawing depicting a family walk that ends in horror. The sketch showed one family member retrieving gasoline from a truck, dousing the others and setting them on fire. This grim drawing suggested a very different narrative from an abduction, hinting at Jasmine's involvement in the tragedy. When authorities found the chilling drawing in Jasmine's locker, they began to view her disappearance with suspicion, suspecting that she might be involved in her family's murder. Prompted by Jasmine's friends who revealed Jeremy's affection for Jasmine and disturbing remarks about harming her parents, police quickly started looking also for Jeremy. These leads, coupled with a slew of digital evidence from messages, emails, and chat logs, helped investigators piece together a grim motive. Soon, the story of the suspected killer couple was making headlines, shocking and horrifying the Medicine Hat community. Detectives turned to the media to help find Jasmine, hoping she would make contact or that someone would provide information that could lead to her. Due to her age, Canadian law prohibited the media from publishing Jasmine's real name, so news agencies started referring to her simply as JR. However, police uncovered that a few hours after the crime, Jasmine and Jeremy were seen at a restaurant and later at a party hosted by an acquaintance. Witnesses at the party noted that Jasmine seemed normal, showing no signs of abduction or shock. She was seen drinking and enjoying herself. When questioned by friends about how they managed to escape from her parents, Jasmine laughed and remarked, "Jeremy and I just took care of them," to which Jeremy added, "I carved them up like fish." The party guests thought this was a dark joke, not realizing the truth in their words. Their infamy led to their downfall. Within 24 hours of the murders, they were spotted in the community of Leader, Saskatchewan, about 100 miles from Medicine Hat. Police found them sleeping in a pickup truck and arrested them without resistance. Despite their arrest, Jasmine and Jeremy seemed indifferent, showing more annoyance than remorse. During interrogation, their apparent unity crumbled. Jeremy confessed that Jasmine had implored him to eliminate her parents, promising to do anything for her. In turn, Jasmine pinned the blame solely on Jeremy, claiming her previous talks of killing her family were just jokes and she never intended any real harm. However, Jeremy's version aligned more convincingly with the extensive digital evidence, suggesting that both had actively participated in the planning and execution of the crime. The burning question was, what exactly was their plan? On the night of April 22nd, Jasmine stealthily let Jeremy into her house. She then went upstairs as Jeremy headed to the basement. There, he confronted Deborah and brutally attacked her with a folding knife. The noise woke Mark, who rushed to help his wife, only to find himself in a deadly struggle. Mark dashed towards the basement upon hearing a disturbance, only to discover his wife on the floor with a masked man looming over her. A struggle ensued as Mark attempted to wrestle the knife away from the intruder, but tragically, he was overpowered and sustained multiple stab wounds to his chest and back. As he lay fading, he managed to ask the assailant why, to which the chilling reply was, "Because your daughter wanted it that way." Mark succumbed to his injuries shortly thereafter. While this grim scene unfolded downstairs, Jasmine was upstairs, supposedly tasked with killing her younger brother Tyler, who was peacefully asleep. The accounts of what happened next vary significantly between Jasmine and Jeremy. Jeremy asserted that Jasmine had acted alone in killing Tyler. Jasmine, on the other hand, claimed she initially hesitated, and it was Jeremy who urged her to go through with it. She admitted to stabbing Tyler, albeit reluctantly, which she described as weakly. However, evidence showed that Tyler had been stabbed 5 times, including a severe laceration to his throat. After the murders, Jeremy left the scene, leaving Jasmine alone in the house with the bodies of her family. She then took a taxi to Jeremy's trailer, escaping the horrific scene she had left behind. During the trial, a taxi driver testified about picking up Jasmine shortly after the murders. Remarkably, she appeared calm and greeted him cheerfully, showing no signs of distress despite the recent loss of her entire family. After being picked up, Jasmine reunited with Jeremy, and the two spent the next 24 hours together, seemingly unaffected by the gravity of their actions. They were observed being affectionate in public, even visiting friends and boastfully discussing what they had done. Their lack of remorse extended even after their arrest. Interestingly, authorities allowed them to exchange letters, possibly hoping to gather more evidence from their communications. In these letters, Jeremy proposed to Jasmine, and she accepted, further demonstrating their disconnect from the severity of their situation and the normal responses expected under such circumstances. After Jasmine claimed that Jeremy was solely responsible for the murders, the pair faced their trials a year later, in June 2007. Jeremy, being an adult, was subjected to the full extent of the law. His defense painted him as a psychologically weak individual with low self-esteem, blaming his violent actions on a history of abuse from his mother's lovers and a desperate craving for affection. They argued that he sought Jasmine's love to fill the emotional void from his troubled childhood, a sentiment echoed by his friends who said he would do anything for her affection. Nonetheless, such explanations did not excuse the heinous nature of his crimes, and Jeremy was sentenced to 3 life terms, with a possibility of parole after 25 years. Jasmine, referred to as JR in court due to her age, was also found guilty of murdering her family. The digital evidence and her behavior before and after the murders painted a clear picture of her involvement. Her lack of remorse was striking, especially when she was observed smiling while recounting the events of her family's deaths during her testimony. However, because she was a minor at the time of the crimes, the harshest sentence she could receive under Canadian law was 10 years, which included psychiatric care and monitored living in a community setting, rather than traditional incarceration. This lighter sentence reflects the complexities of dealing with young offenders, even those involved in grave crimes. During her incarceration, Jasmine was often cited as a model of successful rehabilitation. Through therapy and severing ties with Jeremy, she began to show genuine remorse for her actions, convincing the authorities responsible for her rehabilitation that she was unlikely to reoffend. The person in charge of her expressed hope for her transformation, suggesting that her family, had they survived, might have been proud of her progress. He reminded her that while the past cannot be changed, she has control over her daily actions and behavior. In the last 5 years of her sentence, Jasmine studied under a new identity to help her reintegrate into society. She was released in 2016 and has since lived anonymously among the public. Meanwhile, Jeremy remains incarcerated, a situation many deem appropriate, considering his predatory behavior prior to the murders. The debate over Jasmine's sentencing remains contentious. Some argue that if someone is old enough to commit a crime, they should face the full consequences, while others believe that Jasmine, who was only 12 at the time and manipulated by an older man, deserved a chance for rehabilitation. After maintaining a clean record for 5 years following her release, Jasmine's criminal record was expunged, allowing her a fresh start without the burden of her past crimes. Mark and Deborah Richardson are remembered as caring parents. The complexity of Jasmine's case raises difficult questions about justice, punishment, and rehabilitation, especially considering her age and the influence exerted by an older individual. While 10 years may seem short given the severity of the crime, the circumstances of her age and manipulation add layers of complexity to the discussion of her case. Canada's judicial approach often emphasizes rehabilitation over strict punishment, which sets it apart from places like the US, where the focus might lean more towards punitive measures. This philosophy raises complex questions, especially in cases like Jasmine's. Despite being only 12 years old when she committed her crimes, the severity of her actions, killing her entire family, is undeniable. This leads to a significant debate. Can someone who has committed such grave acts be fully reformed and trusted once released?